Good evening. Welcome to the town board meeting for January 30th, 2019. I will ask the town clerk to call the roll.
Councilman Weissmandel. Councilman Rossman. Councilwoman Deputy Supervisor Charles. Councilman Wanunu. Supervisor Specht.
Here. I'll ask also Mr. Sampson if you'll lead us in the pledge of the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like one moment of silence for Bill Farber, who was a World War II veteran and a tireless advocate on behalf of veterans who unfortunately passed away the other day. Thank you. Okay. First item is we have a public hearing on a proposed local law. I'll ask the Assistant Town Attorney, Mr. Lynch, if you will read the proposed local law to the board and the public.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Supervisor, members of the board. The record should reflect that the postings and affidavits with regard to postings have been submitted. This notice of public hearing concerns a proposed local law, and it's a local law amending local law number 10-2004 of zoning as amended to permit houses of worship in multifamily dwellings. That's section 1, legislative intent. The zoning law currently prohibits the use of a portion of a multifamily dwelling for house of worship. The town wishes to permit a house of worship to be located in a portion of a multifamily dwelling subject to site plan approval. The bulk requirement shall be the use group for the multifamily dwelling in which the house of worship is located. Section 2. Amend section 376-5, quote, definitions, close quote, by adding the following definition. Quote, neighborhood house of worship is a portion of a multifamily dwelling used exclusively for the conduct of organized religious services. No school or outside catering is permitted. At least 75% of the membership must live within 3/4 mile radius of the house of worship. The bulk requirement shall be the use group for the multifamily dwelling in which the house of worship is located. Section 3. Amend section 36-31, table of general use requirements, part 1. Residential districts, column B, quote, uses permitted by right, close quote, and column B-1, quote, use group, close quote, R15 by adding the following. Column B, number 8, neighborhood house of worship, column B-1. See section 376-5 for bulk requirement. Section 4, amend section 376-31, table of general use requirements, part 1. Residential districts, column B, quote, uses permitted by right, close quote, and column B-1, quote, use groups, close quote, R-15A, by adding the following. Column A, number 4, neighborhood house of worship, column B-1. See section 367-5 for bulk requirement. Section 5, amend section 376-31, table of general use requirements, part 1. Residential districts, column B, quote, uses permitted by right, close quote, and column B-1, quote, use group, close quote, R-15C, by adding the following, colon, column B, number 8, neighborhood house of worship, column B-1. See section 376-5 for bulk requirement. Section 6, amend section 376-31, table of general use requirements, part 1, colon, residential districts, column F, quote, minimum off-street parking spaces, close quote, by adding the following, colon, 3, in brackets, capital A, neighborhood house of worship. Next line, as determined by the planning board. Section 7, effective date. This local law shall take effect immediately upon filing with the Secretary of State. That, Mr. Supervisor, members of the board, is the proposed local law.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. If you could also give us, if there's a list of exhibits to read into the record.
Certainly be happy to. Exhibit number 2 is the affidavit of posting with regard to this particular matter. Exhibit number 3 is the local law amendment that is presented, or the legal notice on the signboard, January 17, 2019. Those 3 exhibits are the exhibits with regard to this particular matter.
In addition, I think we have additional exhibits. We have the recommendation of Frederick P. Clark regarding a secret determination.
That is correct, Mr. Supervisor. In addition to what I said, it is the Frederick P. Clark Associates recommendation. We also have as Exhibit 5 the Rockland County Department of Planning matter. Exhibit 6 is a January 30th, 2019 memorandum from the Town of Planning Board to the Supervisor Specht, members of the board. Exhibit 7 is a email received from a B-A-R-A-C-H, last name is G-O-B-I-O-F-F. In addition, there's also a memorandum received from Deborah M-U-N-I-T-Z. In addition, there's also a letter dated January 24, 2019, Exhibit 9 from the County of Rockland to Alan Berman. Those are the exhibits we have right now. We also have a proposed GML override with regard to this particular matter.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. If we could just, Mr. Clerk, have the record reflect that Deputy Supervisor and Councilwoman Charles is now present. We have a full board. Mr. Lynch, if you could just summarize in pertinent part the county general municipal law review's letter regarding this proposed letter.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. I'm happy to do that. The county GML review has several objections that they note. This particular matter is in a January 28, 2019 correspondence. It has in this particular case 13 points. The recommendation by the Department of Planning is disapproved. In summary, the comments deal with adding additional places of worship, and they indicate that in this particular matter, places of assembly of worship in single-family residences, they must be subject to a higher level of review. Also recommended that in this particular matter, that the proposed zoning law with regard to multifamily dwellings that is not permitted in the R15 district. With regard to the third point, it indicates that the department is not in favor of permitting houses of worship in multifamily dwellings as of right. In addition, other comments for, it's unclear with regard to the permitted only to be used in a new structure. Number 5, it's unclear why the amendment proposed a reference to definitions. Number 6, a neighborhood house of worship in a multifamily dwelling must have stricter bulk standards relative to buffer requirements. Number 6A, adjacent residential properties must be sufficiently buffered. 6B talks about additional lighting requirements. 6C, additional parking requirements. 6D, a specific requirement for maximum floor area, handicap accessible ADA compliance. Paragraph 7 indicates that the 75% of the membership in a 3/4 mile radius, that is a lot, is a very wide reach. Number 8 indicates that the ability of the existing infrastructure to accommodate is a concern that must be evaluated. Number 9, that a neighborhood place of worship in a multifamily dwelling must comply with all requirements of New York State Uniform Fire Prevention Code. Number 10, a neighborhood house of worship should not be permitted in a multifamily residential dwelling on an undersized and non-conforming lot. Number 11, that the site plan for proposed neighborhood house of worship should be subject to review by the county. Number 12, that conditions of the override must be filed with the county. Number 13, the executive order of the county executive of 01-2017 must be complied with. Those are, in summary, Mr. Supervisor, are the county's comments.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. As you noted, we have a letter from the Rockland County Sewer District Number 1. I'll just summarize it. In essence, the letter doesn't address the merits of the proposal, but states that if houses of worship are created under this proposed law, then there could be sewer impact fees that would be assessed by the sewer district, and they ask that any payment of the impact fee be made to the district before structures are connected to the sewer system, and that any approvals of any applications under this law occur, that the sewer district be notified, and that the town board notify the district if the local law is approved. So at this point, I'm going to ask Michael Klasky, the town's planner, to discuss the proposed local law.
All right, thank you, Mr. Supervisor and members of the board. So tonight, we're here to discuss an update to the House of Worship zoning regulations. We are proposing to modify and replace existing text, add new text, and reorganize various sections of the zoning law regarding community facilities, and in this case, houses of worship. The zoning law currently allows a community facility, in this case a house of worship, to be slightly larger than a residential structure built on a tax lot of equal size in the same zone. An example of how this works are the requirements for a two-family home versus a local house of worship in the R15 zone, where a house of worship building may be approximately 20% larger than the residential construction that's allowed. The rationale behind this is that if the same residential bulk controls were imposed on most community facilities, as are on residential districts in the same district, many community facilities would not be able to locate in most residential districts. A school, a house of worship, a hospital, or a college must be a certain size to operate efficiently, even in low-density, low-bulk zones, which make up all of Ramapo except for the RSH and the MR zoning districts. Applying the same FAR ratio to community facilities would require community facilities occupy significantly larger sites in most districts. Assembling large sites in Ramapo is complicated, difficult, and expensive, creating problems for institutions the town needs and wants and for the neighborhoods in which they locate and serve. However, it should be noted in some districts that the planning board has determined that community facility buildings should not be significantly larger than neighboring residential buildings. Now, I'd like to go into the context of what these neighborhood houses of worships are, within the nature of larger, more regional houses of worship that many of us are familiar with. Large regional houses of worship often bring large numbers of people into low-density residential areas, and as a result, congregants driving automobiles vie with residents for limited on-street parking, which exists in some neighborhoods in the unincorporated town of Ramapo. Traffic congestion and illegal parking, such as blocking driveways, can result in many cars seeking spaces near large houses of worship located in low-density areas. This phenomenon can disrupt the quality of life and quiet atmosphere important to many of our residents. In addition, the existing zoning law recognizes that some houses of worship may not generate significant parking demand, and for that purpose, the town established a definition known as the local house of worship, which relaxed required parking for houses of worship utilized in such a way to reduce demand for parking. Now, as the town has grown and become more mixed use in nature, with a higher demand for goods, services, and community facilities closer to everyone's residences, beginning with the establishment of the mixed-use zoning district in the Muncie downtown core area, which is a plan which was adopted in 2004, known as the Muncie Area Plan, which was made a part of the 2004 Comprehensive Plan. This allowed most community facilities, such as houses of worships, in essentially all zoning districts. This model has been successful until recently, where the neighborhood model has encountered applications that were never contemplated by this law, such as a micro house of worship. In the Jewish community, it's known as a shtibel, a Yiddish term meaning little room, loosely translated, which is typically a loosely organized grassroots neighborhood house of worship within a larger building containing other uses. This was never contemplated by our zoning law. Now, the need to define a neighborhood. I've mentioned that we have a more regional scope of a house of worship, and we also have a local house of worship. It is recognized by our department that the geographic area that's considered as one's neighborhood is continuously shrinking as the town grows, and places that had previously been 5 minutes away become 20 minutes away as vacant lands become new neighborhoods and our community grows. The department recognizes in this regard that some houses of worship are more neighborhood in their orientation, while others are small facilities that attract some congregants from the surrounding areas, and yet others are even more regional. The ones mentioned in my opening statement regarding parking nuisances. Now, how are we tonight defining neighborhood level in the context of this local law? Neighborhood-oriented houses of worship have a majority of their members residing within close proximity, while other larger houses of worship have memberships that reside beyond walking distances. It is those houses of worship that are most likely to generate parking demand because most members drive to such facilities. Our department proposes that a simplified administrative process be devised to reduce or waive the parking requirement for such houses of worship, based on the determination that a significant portion of the congregants reside within walking distance of such a facility. Our department believes that 75% is an appropriate threshold which captures the predominant percentage of the congregation and notes that the use of a 3/4 mile radius is appropriate since it typically reflects a 15-minute walk. In addition, we believe that smaller houses of worship, which allow parts of their facilities to be used for the operation of catering businesses, should not be eligible for this proposed certification because the facility would be used frequently by individuals coming to social events greater than walking distance. With this in mind, we recommend establishing a new third definition with regard to the house of worship class of community facility that accounts for houses of worship that serve the needs of residents in close proximity, defined above as a walking neighborhood. Neighborhood houses of worship within buildings in the R15, R15A, and R15C districts. The proposal recognizes that these types of houses of worship may not generate significant or perhaps any parking demand, and for that purposes, establishes a process which would allow for a reduction or a waiver of required parking for houses of worship that are operated or utilized in such a way to reduce demand for parking. The proposed law will allow the planning board flexibility in determining demand for off-street parking on a case-by-case basis. The proposed law does not include a formula or a list of factors which the board may consider, which may be, however, a list or factors may be adopted by the planning board at a later date for recommendation to the town board for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Do you have any
Klatsky.
questions?
Any questions from the board for Mr. Klatsky? I just have a question, if you can clarify, the zones that are proposed for this to be permitted under the local law, are these zones that currently permit places, houses of worship?
So in the R15 we do. The question is, I guess the contemplation here is a house of worship located within another building. That is not permitted in the R15C and the R15A districts. In another building is, what we mean by that, we're defining that as a multifamily building. Such buildings do not exist in the R15 district. They are only allowed in the R15A and R15C districts.
Okay, so just to clarify, houses of worship are permitted in the R15C and R15A, but currently not as part of a multifamily building?
That is correct.
And you've indicated the R15 does not contain provisions for multifamily dwellings.
That is correct.
Should the local law be amended if we were to adopt it to remove the reference to R15 since it's not applicable?
I think that makes sense. Yes, I would agree.
Okay, thank you. Anything from the board at this
Mr.
time?
Klatsky, what does our zoning code say in other multifamily zones like the MR8, MR12, MR16?
I could not hear what you said.
What happens in the other multifamily zones like the MR8, MR12, and 16? Is there any reference to shuls in those situations?
In those, I would have to look that up for you. I can get the answer for you.
Thank you.
Anything else from the board? If not, I'll open it up to public comment. Okay, I'll open up to the members of the public. Does anybody wish to speak on this issue? Mr. Romanowski.
Robert Romanowski, 183 Maple Avenue, Muncie. About this new local law, first rule says 70% must live within 3/4 of a mile of the proposed in this proposal for the shul within 3/4 of a mile. They must live. How do you know if these people actually live within 3/4 when they come there? Are you going to have someone out there asking them to see ID or something, and asking where they live? So how can this be enforced? And a lot of these lots that have multifamily housing, especially in the Herrick Avenue, are very small. They're non-conforming lots, which of course we're grandfathered in. We're put in the R15C zone, even though they're a lot smaller. So that will make things a lot more difficult. And the other issue is parking. Even with the local houses of worship, you see it all the time. You go on Jeffrey Place, Vincent Road, Park Lane, where these local houses of worship are, there are cars parked on both sides of the road, blocking the road. Even though they're supposed to walk there, a lot of them don't. They take the car, do their religious things that they do have to do there, then get in the car and go beyond with the rest of their day. The only time there isn't parking problem here is on Saturday, so I think you haven't spent a lot of time on this. You really should look into this a lot more and discuss it amongst yourselves and look at the problems that this is going to be causing before you take any action tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Romanowski. Anybody else wish to speak? And I'll ask everyone, keep your comments to 3 minutes. Yes, sir.
Robert Buettner, 67 Johnsontown Road, Sloatsburg, New York.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your last name?
Buettner, B-U-E-T-T-N-E-R.
Thank you.
I just find that the amendment is sparse, and I think the county comments were pretty legitimate, and they have a lot of concerns. It seems to me that if you're saying that you have these small places of worship and they're going to be walking, that you should define it around those things. And giving parking exemptions doesn't make any sense. I think Chestnut Ridge went through an exercise looking at community houses of worship or residential houses of worship, and I think they went and covered a lot of issues. I think you should look at what they are proposing and how detailed they're looking into. Nobody should say that there shouldn't be these houses of worship, but I think it shouldn't be a situation where you can drive a truck through it, and there can be a whole sorts of abuse. And I think we have concerns about how things get approved, how things get inspected, how zoning laws are complied with. And I think we have a horrible history with that, and I think this has no safeguards for any of that.
Thank you, Mr. Buhner. Anybody else wish to speak? Yes, sir, right here.
Eli Silverman, 102 Bonaire Circle, Suffern, New York. You cite the Planning Commission's multiple objections to this proposal and rightfully append it to your document. Don't you think it's incumbent upon you all to address their objections? Why do we not see a written statement from you all addressing each and every one of their objections? Don't you think the public is entitled to your responses to those objections?
Thank you. Next, please. Yes, ma'am, right here.
Heide Farrar, 32 North Dearborn.
Last name?
Farrar, F-A-R-R-A-R. I have actually two questions. One is, should you approve the house of worship in a multiple family dwelling, how would that affect the taxes, real estate taxes of that dwelling? Would it be exempt from taxation altogether, or would it be a percentage of the size of the house of worship versus the rest of it? So I don't know if you can give me an answer, but I'm very interested in how many more houses come off the tax rolls this way. Secondly, I'd like you to actually tonight give me an explanation of a difference between a multi-family dwelling and a condominium. Could you please do that?
I think we can answer both of those questions. I may need help from our planner and our attorney, but I think they're, with the taxes, Mr. Lynch, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the only part that would be exempt would be the part of the building that is owned by an exempt organization and used for an exempt purpose. So if you had a three-family dwelling and one of the units was tax exempt, was eligible, that would be the tax exempt part.
That's correct, Mr. Supervisor. This particular local law has no impact upon whether somebody is or is not entitled to an exemption. That's a separate analysis that will be taken by the assessor. It depends upon the facts of each specific case, but generally, what you're saying is absolutely correct.
I think there's a concern, and we can address it now, that if you have a multifamily dwelling that contains a unit that contains a house of worship, does that make the whole building therefore exempt?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. And then the second question was the difference between multifamily and condominium. And again, I'll ask you to jump in if I'm not correct, but condominium is a legal term that refers to a form of ownership of a property. It could be an apartment. You could have a single-family detached house that's owned as a condominium. Multifamily in the Tanner-Brown zoning code refers to a building that houses 3 or more dwelling units. So whether it's owned as one legal entity and 3 units are then rented out separately, or whether each one is owned separately as a condominium is an issue as to ownership, but it's not a zoning classification. And again, correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct again.
Thank you, sir. Next question from the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Bila Berkowitz, 32 North Dearborn Avenue in Suffern. My question is, I'm not aware of any other public meeting that we've had open to the public for the purpose of discussing this amendment of the law. Am I correct about that?
There was a town board meeting in December. It was an open meeting at which we passed a resolution to schedule the public hearing date. This is the first public hearing.
Right. So it seems to me from what I read just now that it's a done deal. And that to me is not what democracy is all about. I really think that we should have a chance to voice our opinions, not only during one meeting, and also to refer to some of the objections that we've heard here today.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? Yes, ma'am.
Susan Tackle, Bon Air Circle, Suffern, New York. I've been a resident of Rockland County since 1949, so I've seen it grow, good and bad. My question is, if you have multiple housing, how many houses of worship are limited to a block or a designated area?
Are you asking currently now under the zoning law?
I'm asking how this will impact this new law that you plan.
I don't think it changes it in either direction. Right now, Mr. Klasky and Mr. Lynch again, right now, are there any restrictions under the law? How many houses of worship could exist in any given geographic area?
I'll defer to Mr.
And
Lynch.
I believe as a matter of law, there could not be such restrictions. It's a First Amendment issue.
Thank you.
So, excuse me, what is the answer?
Yeah, I think so.
There's no limit? So in other words, you could have 10 of these on one street, and each one can have a synagogue inside or any house of worship?
Well, every application would have to go to the planning board. And
Are you the planning board?
There's a separate board in the town of Arapahoe that would be, that would hear it as they normally hear for any house of worship application. That's the process. And they would determine whether a site plan should be approved or not. But as our counsel stated, I don't believe you could have a law that could say no more than 3 synagogues, 3 churches per street or per neighborhood. I don't think you could do it on, other than on a case-by-case.
If I could supplement, the fact that there's no law that limits it does not mean the planning board cannot limit it. Issues of traffic and safety and sanitary and other normal planning issues can limit the number of any type of development, including houses of worship.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch.
I have another part B to my question. What kind of credentials does the head of this facility need to have to call it a religious house of worship?
I think that's beyond the scope of this law, because it would be the same requirements, no more, no less than... I'm sorry?
I think it's beyond the scope of this
I
board.
would agree with you. I mean, we currently, as we are required, and we should under New York law, allow houses of worship, and we're not looking to
Certification is,
delve into the
That would be,
credentials of somebody being
that
a
issue
religious
would
congregation.
be based, that
For this
issue,
purpose.
that issue would be decided by the assessor based upon documentation provided. It must be a bona
If you're
fide.
talking about a tax exemption.
Correct.
Which we're not.
So, in other words, my husband and I and another couple, we can buy 3 houses or 1 house and make one little area a house of worship. You're not asking me for a credential.
I'm not sure what your point is about
My
credentials.
point is, are you going to have a leader who's going to open services or offer themselves as a leader of a community in a religious facility? Are they ordained in some fashion?
That's not a question for government to look into. If it's a tax exemption issue, it will be dealt with by the assessor. There are laws, case law and statutes that address that, but for zoning purposes, it's inappropriate.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Yes, sir in the back. Okay. Well, please come up and give us your name and address, sir. Thank you.
Avi Maor from 20 Dogwood.
I didn't hear that.
Avi Maor from 20 Dogwood Lane.
Thank you.
I seek clarification from the attorney because he said that the exemption is granted to a use or to ownership. In other words, a house, a residential building that will have in it a religious facility will become a mixed-use building. Now, that mixed-use building, even though it's different uses, can have the single ownership. In other words, whoever owns the building also can own the unit that is for religious purposes. The question is, the exemption for religious facilities, is it granted to an ownership or to the use?
Excuse me, counsel, if I can interrupt you. We just happen to have our assessor with us, and I'm going to ask Scott Shedler to come up because we could use your clarity. So Mr. Shedler, if you take a seat on the side. Sir, can you go back to the dais, please? Go back to the microphone and ask the question now so that we can
Okay.
have a proper response. Thank you.
Sorry, Scott.
That's okay.
The question is,
I can summarize the question. Are religious exemptions granted by the assessor based upon title ownership or actual use of the property?
So,
Yeah, I know.
property tax exemptions, whether they're all dictated by the real property tax law, sections 420A and 420B, and it's based on the state's requirements, and it's based on ownership, so the ownership has to meet the state's requirements as well as the use of the property. So it's not just one particular item, it's a series of items. We have a series of hurdles you have to get through in order to get an exemption, but first you look at the ownership. The ownership has to be a non-for-profit, and it has to meet certain requirements, all state requirements, by the way. These aren't local requirements.
is a religious institution or organization is allowed to have a non-profit by definition, is allowed to own real estate properties for business purposes?
For the purpose of their, well, if they're applying for a tax exemption,
Yeah.
the use of the property has to be for the use that they were formed for, and the use that they were formed for has to be an exempt use.
Okay.
Let me just interject at this point. We're getting far off track. I believe, and again, Mr. Lynch, clarify if I'm incorrect, the zoning laws cannot take into consideration whether a property would come off the tax rolls or not.
Absolutely correct. This proposed local law does not detract from, add to, or otherwise change the requirements for having a tax exemption, which is handled not by this board, but by the town assessor and the assessment review board, and eventually the courts.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. And I think certainly questions about business uses owned by religious or not-for-profit organizations is really irrelevant to the...
That's nothing to do
question
with this
before
local
board
law,
at this time.
Supervisor.
So I'm going to just ask you if you have anything else. If not, we'll move on.
Okay. How does something like this challenge on the assessor bill?
I'm sorry.
Right now, we got an answer that actually telling us that a building of a residential use, if it will contain a religious unit for religious purposes, if it's under single ownership, will then become an institution that as a whole, or the building as a whole, is exempt from taxes.
I think we
Okay.
answered that question when a previous speaker raised it, but I will put it to rest at this point. Mr. Shedler, I think the question is if you have, for example, a three-family house and it was owned by a religious organization, assuming it was tax exempt, and they used one unit as a house of worship, but the other two units were not used for religious or exempt purposes, what would the effect be upon the assessment?
Right, we would send an inspector out and determine the percent of use that of the property. So if it was a third, it would get a third of an exemption.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shedler. Next, please, from the audience, gentleman in the back in the blue shirt.
Mike Kalinowski, 76 Bonaire Circle, R3,
Mike, will you spell your last name, please?
Kalinowski.
Thank you.
If a multifamily dwelling has one unit designated as a house of worship, will the entire structure be able to be 20% larger? You had said that houses of worship could be 20% larger.
I'll ask Mr. Klasky to address that if you can.
I'll address that. So in our current zoning code, if you build a building that is primarily, if the use of the building is a house of worship, you're allowed to build a slightly larger structure. Our bulk requirement that regulates the size of the building and the setbacks is slightly relaxed if the building is entirely a house of worship. That's our current zoning code. What we're looking at tonight is a proposed zoning code that will maintain the exact same bulk and area regulations that are currently in force for multifamily dwellings in the R15, R15A, and R15C districts. There will not be any sort of bonus granted to a building that has a house of worship within it.
Okay, I have one other question.
Certainly.
with any exemption, there's going to be an increased tax burden on the non-house of worship properties, even if it's only a 1% exemption. What is the town going to do to lighten that burden on the regular tax-paying folk?
And again, something that for the purposes of adopting a zoning consideration, we can't take into account whether properties will come off the tax roll or not. I would just say that obviously houses of worship are permitted in every residential zone. Whether a house of worship occupies a detached house as currently allowed or part of a multifamily house that would fall under the proposed local law, the exemption issue would be no different. Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak at this time? Yes, sir, over there.
Thank you. Paul Nagan, 23 Dogwood Lane, Pomona. So I guess I'm not understanding exactly who this would apply to. Are you saying that a landlord would have to be a religious organization for this to apply to that landlord, where the landlord could then say, I'm designating a certain amount of space for a church or a synagogue?
I don't think there's any law that says a place that's used and zoned for a house of worship has to be owned by a religious corporation, but to get a tax exemption, which is a separate issue, they would have to be. But I don't think there's anything that says an individual couldn't own a house of worship and have it used that way, but they wouldn't get the tax exemption.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm referring to the tax exemption specifically. Yeah. So there's an existing 5-story building, 5-unit building in New Square that in order for the landlord of that building to say, okay, the bottom floor is a church, is a shul, the landlord himself would have to be, or herself would have to be part of a religious organization.
Well, first...
Or a nonprofit landlord.
Yeah, well, first, this law would only affect the unincorporated town around, but wouldn't affect New Square, Suffern, New Hempstead, any of the 12 villages, only the unincorporated town, and only in the zones that are listed in the law. But given that assumption, if you could just restate what your question was.
Well, I'm just asking who this applies to. But it's only, we're talking about people, not people who own homes, but people who are themselves part of a 501c3 organization or a religious organization. They could take advantage of this. Is that what you're saying? Well, I mean, what if, I'm saying if I am just a for-profit landlord, I own a building, okay, now I decide I want to allocate a certain portion for a shul. Can I do that as a...
If this law is approved, the way right now you could buy a detached building and get approved as a synagogue, and it's a synagogue.
And would somebody be allowed to live there?
Not in the synagogue.
Not in the synagogue.
Let me clarify with Mr. Klatsky, and I think that might be some confusion out there. Would this create a residential house of worship where somebody's home would contain the house of worship?
No. So the way this law is proposed is that a unit within a multifamily dwelling can go to the planning board for site plan approval to become a neighborhood house of worship. This planning board will review the site at that time.
Mr. Klatsky, just to break it down into simplicity, it's no different than a community room within a multifamily structure that you see a lot. You'll see a multifamily building that has a community room, a gym. Now it could also have a shul or a church.
Okay, and the owner of that property would be allowed to apply for a tax exemption for that space?
If the owner is
If the tax law that...
Right, if they're normally eligible, if it's a religious or not-for-profit corporation that uses the property for an exempt purpose, then the assessor would have to make that determination. But again, under New York law, an individual cannot get a tax exemption, or a non-religious, not-for-profit can't get a tax exemption. Am I right, Mr. Shedler?
Yes, you are, Mr. Supervisor.
Thank you.
Okay, so then what I was saying before about a landlord who's just in it, is a developer. He or she cannot say, okay, I'm allocating this to be a religious institution.
No, absolutely not. No. I mean, they could let it be religious use, but it wouldn't get an exemption. It wouldn't be an exemption.
It wouldn't get an exemption, okay.
Right. We have to distinguish between a zoning issue and an exemption issue, but correct. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Phyllis Bringsley, Mark 43 Bonnier Circle.
What's your last name?
Bringsley Mark. Want me to spell that for you?
Please.
B-R-I-N-G, S as in Sam,
I'm sorry.
S as in Sam, L-I-M-A-R-K.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I live at 43 Bonaire Circle. It's a co-op. So I needed a clarification as far as who is going to absorb the tax exemption from any religious organization that is in our building or under our co-op association. Who will absorb that?
Well, first of all, it won't affect Bonaire Circle, which is in the Village of Suffern.
Sorry?
It would not affect Bonaire Circle, which is entirely within the Village of Suffern. This is a law that would affect zones within the unincorporated town of Ramapo. Actually, within Muncie, I believe, is where these zones are located. I believe that's the entirety of it. Would not affect anything in the Village of Suffern.
But we are, with the town of Ramapo, we still get
But
taxed.
you're asking about whether, I believe you were asking about whether this would affect your co-op.
Yes, well, except the owners there and the share of their taxes.
Okay.
Will that
Again,
increase?
I said it before.
Will that be absorbed by us?
We can't speculate about whether a property will become exempt or not exempt as a result of a zoning law. That's New York State law. That's an issue we are not able to consider to say yes or no on this law. We have to look at other issues. Mr. Lynch, if there's anything I'm overlooking?
Not at all. I mean, the issue of exemption is completely separate from the zoning law, not within the jurisdiction of this particular board. The town assessor looks at it, they have investigators to go out to examine it, then there's an assessment board of review, and eventually a court. So there's multi-layers in which issues of exemptions are examined, and I can tell you from my personal knowledge, there are exemptions that are applied for and denied and upheld by the court. So it's fact-specific, but nothing to do with this particular local law as to whether you will or will not be entitled to an exemption.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Thank you.
Isn't that something you guys should consider for your approval?
Sorry.
The rest of us, that are residents and people here, I've lived here my whole life. I was born and raised in Suffern. We should have some rights here too, as far as you guys should consider who's going to absorb the tax exemption, and will it be us?
We understand, but again, it's something we can consider. It's something that New York State law requires eligible religious organizations to get tax exemptions if they meet all the requirements. We can't say no to that. We can't take that into account. We can't say we're not going to allow houses of worship anywhere or other exempt purposes because they could have a tax exemption. That's the law. That's the state of the law in New York, and there's really not much more we can say about it. If you have another point, happy to hear it.
No, I'm just not satisfied with your answer.
I understand.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, gentleman in the back.
Jacob Waxhaw, 8 Neva Court, Suffern, New York. Just one more topic on the tax. I know it's boring, but I want to have one question. Regardless if the law passes tonight, if somebody owns, if a religious or non-for-profit organization owns a part of a multifamily condo and they are eligible to be tax exempt, does it make a difference, the law that is on the table tonight?
I'll ask Mr. Shedler and Mr. Lynch to answer that.
So if a religious entity owns a multifamily home and they apply for a tax exemption, they get a tax exemption if they meet the requirements.
Exactly.
Obviously, on a multifamily dwelling, we have to continue to check to see, who's occupying all the different units.
Right. If, for instance, if a rabbi of a specific tax-free organization if a tax-free organization owns a condo and they put in a rabbi over there, does it have to do with the law that is on the table tonight? Or if they're exempt, if they're eligible, they're exempt regardless?
Let me address it. Everything is fact-specific, so you can't give a general answer to a hypothetical question. The assessor goes, the assessor has inspectors who look, they inquire, and then they make a determination.
Right. So my point was that regardless of the law that is here on the table tonight, the question of tax exempt is a separate issue, completely nothing to do with the law that is being discussed tonight.
That is correct.
Well, I think we're in agreement on that.
Yeah, correct.
All right, so, and that's just a comment about the tax. So the other, I would like to talk about the law itself. Just to give you a brief, scope of the community that we are. We have a religious community. Basically, this, like you said before, affects the Muncie community mostly. Not Suffern, not Montebello, not Pomona. It's the unincorporated town of Ramapo, where there's multifamilies, and there are a need for the people in the community that don't drive and don't drive on the Sabbath, and they have to get to a house of worship. I understand that this law that we are looking at is to allow for a house of worship to be in the multifamily dwelling, so the people that live in that 3/4 of a mile radius should be able to gather and have where to pray on the Sabbath. That's what I understand. So as far as our community is concerned, it's a growing community, and the larger the community gets, the more houses of worship is in need. And we're not talking about, huge houses of worship. We're talking about, for an area of, like you said, a 3/4 of a mile radius. Being a part of the community, I can tell you there is a big need for that in the community. As you go out today, in some cases, it's 20 degree, 15 degree, and you could, there's areas that, and days like today and tomorrow, they tell you not even to go out. So, like I said, it's a need that the community needs as far as the growing religious community is something that it's something that we would appreciate that the town board would approve such a law so we could accommodate the community at large. There was one I just wanted to address.
Just to wrap it up, I think we're
Right, just one.
getting close to the time, if not over.
So to wrap it up, there was a previous speaker that asked how many, is there a restriction of how many houses of worship per block? So just wanted to, with seeing the crowd that we have here tonight from all over, from Suffern and Montebello and all over, I think we should allow in our community every house to have one, because in Suffern and Montebello, they don't allow nothing. So please approve it.
Mr. Wagshall,
Thank you.
what's your address?
8 Neva Court, Suffern, New York.
Thank you.
Gentleman over here, on the right. My right.
Thank you very much. Nathan Fleischman, 95 Park Lane, Muncie, New York. I appreciate the chance to say the way I feel about this matter. I've moved to my neighborhood about 7 years ago, and I have to say that the most convenient part of the neighborhood is the fact that Sabbath morning or evening I can go to shul and not have to walk a couple of miles to get there. I have my child of 7, 8 can join me even once the prayers were started. What puzzles me constantly is how the matter of tax exemption comes up over here, when I understand that the tax exemption is not the topic of the law tonight. Tax exemption is, I think everyone agrees, that something that is a religious institution is one of the basics of our great country, is that that it is tax exempt, and I don't understand how that's the topic over here. What I understand is that the point that our community needs so importantly this thing of having shuls close to homes, so Shabbos that we can't walk, we should be able to have access to it, and it is a win-win situation, since these shuls are only open on Shabbos. If you come check the neighborhood, there are shuls that are only open on Shabbos, and there's absolutely no parking there throughout the week. It is convenient to the neighborhoods and does not disturb anyone. It's not even a big construction we're talking about here. We're talking about taking a room in a building, multi-house dwelling, to make that into a place where the neighborhood residents can use for prayers on Shabbos. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Who else? Gentleman in the back.
Hi, my name is William Poor, P-O-R-R, and I live in 80 Bonaire Circle. I just want to know, how many houses of worship do we have in Ramapo right now?
I don't know if we could answer that, and again, it's not something that really is relevant to this question.
Yes, it is, because it's a tax burden on all of us, and it's going to be. And, you know, the more houses of worship, I'm not against religion. But I personally, I go to a church. So there's not a church on every block. You know, it's a mile away if I walk, you know, so it's not an inconvenience to me. If I want to really go to my religious, you know, I want to go to my church, I go to my church. But I think there should be a restriction on how many houses of worship, because it just seems to be a tax-exempt ploy in a lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please. Gentleman over here.
Chaim Hirsch. I live on 4 Rita Avenue, Muncie, New York. I would like to answer a few questions that they mentioned about tax exemptions. These small houses of worship are in need for every, let's say, 40 families in the community. They want to have a small house of worship for Shabbos and holidays. So every 40 new houses that come up, they'll pay tax for this one little apartment of 500 square feet that's not going to pay tax. Nobody is going to empty his house and make it a house of worship just to save on the tax and have no use of it. He's going to make an apartment and he's going to pay tax of it. And then, again, like he said before, if you don't live next door, you won't even notice that it's over there because there's no parking on Shabbos and holidays. These are local communities, and even 3/4 of a mile is a big stretch. Nobody likes to walk more than 5 to 10 minutes to his local shul, and it doesn't create a parking burden. The parking burdens that they mentioned before are usually the bigger synagogues they have to require parking, but that's a whole different issue. We're not discussing this now. Now we're trying to get small house of worship, like 500 square feet instead of an apartment, and people come together, they pray, they're in no one's way. And nobody's going to shove down the throats and suffer in Montebello. We're not going to make house of worships over there because we don't want to walk a half an hour to there, so don't have to worry about it. Wherever the community lives, there's a need for this house of worships, and that's what we're asking for, to accommodate our own needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, back there, sir. No, you in the hat.
How you doing? My name is Ed Wendorf. I live at 10 Dakota Court. That's in Suffern, New York. And I've been listening to this, and it's been really an interesting concept. This is just a limited amount of area that we're talking about. Is that correct? It's not the whole county of Suffern. It's not the whole town of Suffern.
No,
it's a little piece in
certain
Muncie.
zones and unincorporated around them.
What is the need? What is really the need for this? The gentleman over here, the esteemed gentleman over here, said a community center type of concept. Like, why don't we have a community center in this type of dwelling? Well, I don't think you have enough room. And as a Jew, we have a group of esteemed people right here who could have a minyan any place, and you could have a prayer. So, what is the need of changing structure when you have it right here? You could go to your friend's house and pray. You could go any place you want. You could pray. This is the country
Actually, our
that we
zoning
live.
code doesn't allow that.
What?
Our zoning code does not allow that.
You could pray anywhere. You could pray anywhere. Please. You could pray anywhere. You don't have to start changing structures or anything. Please. You should know that. You should know better than that.
Let's not have back and forth.
You don't
Excuse
need
me.
that.
Excuse me,
Anyway,
let's
I'm
not have back
sorry,
and forth.
okay?
No, everybody, just.
Thank you very
keep going.
much.
Thank you. Yes, gentleman in the back.
Good evening. Chaim Volbovitz, 64 Herrick Avenue, Spring Valley, New York. To answer the gentleman's question, the reason why not everybody is going to do this in their house is because on Shabbos, I'm not religious myself, but I know this from growing up religious. On Shabbos, they lay in the Torah, it's a scroll, and not every house is necessarily going to have an ark with a scroll. Each scroll costs in excess of $15,000, and not every house is going to have one of those. Good night.
Thank you, sir. Yes, right over there. If you had your hand up, then yes.
Brenda Penzak, Penczak, 58 Milford Lane, Suffern. I really feel, I know you've said that taxes are not the issue tonight, but it is an issue, and I feel that it's being skirted. I know the village is not affected as far as the changing of the zoning laws, that this is within the town of Ramapo, a certain area. But all of us pay the taxes in the town of Ramapo, and we are concerned, this is opening up a whole thing as far as taxes. How will we be affected? Nobody denies that you have the right to practice religion. I respect that. But you have to respect that I have a right as a senior citizen, born and raised in Rockland County, that I have the right to be able to afford to continue living here. So taxes are very definitely an issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? Gentleman in, I think you spoke already, sir, the blue shirt? I'm sorry? Well, let me see if there's anyone who hasn't spoken yet first. Yeah. Oh, Mayor, I'm sorry, I didn't see you had your hand up, please. Mayor Markounis.
Good evening, Board. I am Mayor Ed Markounis from the Village of Suffern. Thank you for convening this public hearing this evening. I just want to come up and express my concerns as the mayor of the Village of Suffern and the surrounding village in the town of Ramapo. I would like to say that I agree with the findings of the Rockland County Department of Planning, and I urge this board, before voting this evening, to fully review the concerns that were presented by the County of Rockland and the Planning Department. There are concerns that they address in regards to the New York State Fire Prevention and Building Code, site plan approval, parking, bulk requirements, emergency services, adjacent property concerns. So these are some of the concerns that my constituents expressed to me. They are concerned also with the tax impact, fully understanding that this local law does not take place in the Village of Suffern. The Village of Suffern is totally autonomous, and we have our own zoning and code regulations. I would like to assure those residents that this change does not impact the Village of Suffern. We need collectively in the Village of Suffern, but I'm expressing my concern to the town of Ramapo, to fully reevaluate this proposed local law and all local laws and land use and zonings and codes within the town of Ramapo. And I just really am here to represent the Village of Suffern, and that's my position. I agree with the County of Rockland.
Thank you, Mayor. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, over there.
Good evening. My name's Alan Friedberg, 1 Dogwood Place, Pomona, New York, 10970. I'm very glad the mayor brought up the issue of the letter that the county wrote. I think they've addressed some very significant enforcement issues, and I think before this town board can vote on a law in which the County of Rockland and their representatives have voiced to you significant concerns regarding potentials for abuse and also for safety and also for enforcement, that you have to address those concerns before you take on to vote this kind of law. I also would ask that while you're not considering the tax ramifications, it seems to me that if these multi-family dwellings, which were presumably most of which are already on the tax codes, if they're already on the tax codes and they want to have a separate room like a gymnasium or a community room and they want to designate it a religious facility, they should be able to do it, but waive their tax exemptions to the extent that this is a building that's being used for residential purposes primarily, and so it should be maintained on the tax rolls as what it is, a residential facility where there's a community room that they've turned into a religious facility that they can use on Shabbos or any other particular time that they want to have a community event there, but that they don't have to seek out special tax exemptions so that they put a burden on the rest of the taxpayers, considering the fact that it's an otherwise multifamily dwelling that would be subjected to tax. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Friedberg. Anybody else at this time? Ms. Munitz.
Hi, my name is Deborah Munitz. I live at 5 Rose Hill Road in the town of Ramapo. I already submitted comments. I hope that all of you have gotten them and have had time to read them. I actually was, for a long time, the only person present at the planning board meeting last night where they discussed this matter. And their concerns, and I honestly don't think they even had time to read what I wrote, very much mirrored my concerns and very much mirrored the concerns of the Rockland County. I went through, at the time that I made my foils, I did not see any letters from F.P. Clark. I think it would make sense that, since it wasn't posted for the public, that I can't even fathom what he based any kind of recommendation on, because there was no evidence that I could find in the record to support this. There was no analysis of the impacts of this in any way, shape, or form on any of the zones at all. So I didn't see anything, and I really would have read that and would have liked to have commented on that. Similarly, Mr. Klatsky read something at length tonight that was also not in the record, and I did not have time to read it, so it was rather rushed and very detailed, and I think that should have been made available to the public before this meeting. I went through the county GML, and I went through it, one by one. And I have not heard the recommendation how the notes from last night from the planning board meeting got written up. But, I made my comments with respect to this as a zoning law. As a zoning law, this is a really poor zoning law, primarily because of how it was constructed, being based solely upon site plan, where the planning board has limited powers under site plan review. They have much more extensive ability under special permit review, and unquestionably, that was the one thing that came out very clearly from last night, is that the planning board was completely uncomfortable with the lack of guidelines that was included in this law, and that they very much felt that this law should be redone as a special use permit. It was so rushed that they were making conflicting recommendations just in sort of this haste to try and figure out a way to correct it. And the reality is you have a primarily orthodox planning board who is very familiar with the situations that come before them with respect to all of these issues, and they were 100% not in favor of this law as it's written today. And the truth is, and they were also very much it was a last minute, it was very rushed, and they didn't have, the town planner wasn't there to advise them. For the better part of the hour that they had this discussion, the town attorney was not even there. It was really just Mr. Klatsky. The public was not allowed to talk or participate in this meeting. It was just Mr. Klatsky just pushing them again and again, give me feedback, give me feedback. And I haven't heard any of that summarized for you tonight, and I don't know how it was summarized, but I am telling you that I will, swear to this, they were very concerned about the impact to the existing residents, and I think everyone knows, or maybe everyone doesn't know, but there needs to be, laws guiding, assembly in residential units, and not just for religious purpose, but for other purposes. I would say that this law as constructed is sort of like almost the opposite of many problems in that it doesn't even address other uses that would be normal, and it should be considered as a general, assembly law that if a Boy Scout troop wants to buy a unit in a multifamily house and basically say that's their new home base, and they want to have meetings, a couple times a week, and use that as their primary purpose. They should be able to do that. If, this is not just about, it shouldn't be about just the Jewish population, although we know that's burgeoning and it's driving this. You can't write laws that are so specific and so presumptive and so assumptive. There's no question that, there's a demand for Shabbos shuls. But as they said, if you're having a real Shabbos shul and you have the Torah and all the rest, you do need a certain population to support it. And so, the comment made earlier was that you need, 40 people to be able to afford to support this kind of unit that's being discussed tonight. And truthfully, it's probably more. And so you have to think about the fact that the types of units, these multifamily units, are very, very dense. People are buying them for residential purposes. The purpose of zoning is to create sort of guidelines to buffer uses one from another, and you are not providing the planning board with any capability, to, make sure that you don't have 12 of these in a multifamily unit of 12, so they very much were, we can't have these everywhere, you have to have some limitation. That's not addressed. They were very clear about the parking being a huge issue. That's not addressed. They don't want that on their head. They completely agreed with number 3 of the GML, number 4 of the GML, number 5. It says, it's summarized, it must be categorized as a special use rather than as a right use. That was very clear from last night's meeting. Adjacent properties must be sufficiently buffered. They didn't use that word because you don't really have a buffer situation in a multifamily unit. You have a completely different situation that was discussed as what would be the impact of shared hallways, of having 40 or 60 people, trying to access the unit that's being considered. There is an impact on people. The discussion of whether this was new, only for new construction, or only for old construction, you had a recommendation only for new construction, and then later on they were like, oh, wait, only for old, flipping back and forth on a fundamental issue. The town of Ramapo, actually, let me just say, they also completely, agreed with 6C, number 7, and then there were a number of them that weren't really addressed. The town has already approved, LaBerge as a planner. You've got Dover Coal. You've already announced dates to start the meetings with the public on Envision Ramapo, or whatever you want to call the precursor to the comprehensive plan. This is a comprehensive plan issue. This hasn't been revisited. There were changes that were made, and you got to take a step back and say, okay, what's worked? What hasn't worked? Where are the pain points? Where are not the pain points? And you have to do this and let it be led, by, the people who want these kinds of facilities. It should absolutely be driving a lot of the feedback. But I heard from a predominantly Jewish planning board last night that this is not the law that should be passed. And that doesn't mean that the town should not pass a law. I am not saying that in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying that, to have this kind of a terrible law come before you with just like so many open holes at this time where you're actually finally getting around to doing real planning, and not have, planners be involved in constructing it, and recommendations and, thoughtful analysis. It is just going to make the problems that we're having worse. And this is obviously a hot topic. And you say this is not going to affect, I'm wrapping up. You say that this is not going to affect anything outside the unincorporated areas, but we know that zoning changes. What's R15 today could be R15A or C tomorrow. It's happened in the past. I raised the issue, that why wouldn't you have this in another multifamily? Like, there's a lack of consistency and fairness about this, and the truth is, there have been proposals in the past to bring multifamily closer, and that's a big discussion that's happening right now in the Northeast strategic planning meetings. So, you can't just say, oh, don't bother me, don't comment on this, this is not going to affect you. It affects everyone, and I'm not talking about tax issues. I'm saying this affects everyone because We have fundamental issues of health and safety in the town. We have problems with parking. I've heard time and time again the fire department complaining about parking in fire lanes. All of these things have to be discussed and considered in a thoughtful, rational way with full participation by everyone who's coming out tonight to advocate for it. And it needs to be done, and it needs to be guided by professional planners, not thrown against the wall the way this was.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to speak? Gentleman in the front row.
Good evening. Haskell Landau, 87 Union Road, Spring Valley, New York. I appreciate the board for coming out tonight on such an important issue that is waiting so long to be addressed. And I thank everybody for their comments. I want to apologize. Maybe I'll say something that was addressed before. I came a bit late. I wasn't at the very beginning. But I want to say a few points that may be important tonight that will help clarify. The first thing is that I guess most people know, but not everybody knows, that there's a Jewish law that every Jewish male over the age of 13 must pray every day, 3 times a day, with a group that's called a minyan of 10 people. And it usually takes place in shuls. That means that every boy over the age of 13 is required to use a shul every day, at least twice a day. We do the afternoon and the evening prayer together in some cases. And that means just Friday night, but then Shabbos 2 times, that every adult over 13, it's called an adult in the Jewish law, must be part of the prayers, and that is almost impossible to happen without this law that is in front of you tonight. And it's very important that you pass it and you make it possible. I'm involved in at least 4 properties in the town of Ramapo that were in violation, religious properties, because of fire safety issues and other issues. And one of them is a shul that is now a shul in a multifamily, which my understanding is that many of the properties that are hopefully will be approved by the law that you will adopt are already existence. They are already, most of them are already approved, tax exempt. I don't want to talk about the tax issue since it's not your issue. It's a separate thing. I walked through with the fire inspector of the town of Ramapo, Mike Lepori, and at least 3 times we came back and fixed and provided a safety compliance issue for fire safety for those places. And no one should think that by allowing this law, fire safety would be neglected. Is being dealt with the toughest code as every other public place, and understandable that this will provide relief for everybody in the community. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Landau. Anybody else wish to speak? Gentleman in the back.
Hi, Leo Dunn Fox, 5 Dogwood Place, Pomona. I would just make the point that based on the discussion tonight, there are so many questions that need to be answered, particularly the ones presented by the county, that it would seem to the participants here, at least to myself, that if it's not shelved for discussion, that it was predetermined before we came here and our discussion was moot. So we're all very interested in participating in the planning for what happens in Rockland County, and we don't want to feel that we came to a meeting only to find out that the decision was made before we spoke. So what I would recommend is please put this on the table. Let's do the discussion and the research. For instance, I would like to know how many dwellings do you expect this will affect? It seems like that's a very basic question that's never been answered. But you should be able to do some sort of survey. You know what the need is. You can come and tell us that, oh yes, there'll be these many houses that will be involved in this discussion. So once again, I would ask, please put this on the shelf. Let's have discussion. Let's work together. I'm not against it. I'm not for it. It's just premature to be able to make a decision tonight.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else who wishes to speak? Mr. Weber.
Bill Weber, 16 Rose Hill Road, Montebello. I was also at the planning board meeting last night. I walked in a little late. Ms. Muniz was the only one in there. And I was kind of astonished because the planning board that you guys appointed actually said, and it was the consensus of almost every single one of them, they said, it doesn't really matter what we recommend because the board tonight is going to pass it anyway. Mr. Klatsky was there, Mr. Lynch was there. I don't need to make it up. That's what was said, and that was what the planning board said. Now, I'm hoping you can prove them wrong, because I think a lot of the issues, I think, need to be addressed. There's a lot of issues on the county. There's a lot of issues that other people have brought up tonight that I think warrant maybe keeping this public hearing open for a while. So that was point one in terms of a predetermination. Your planning board seemed to think that you guys were going to rubber stamp it tonight, and I'm hoping you will at least prove them wrong. Secondly, I put in a FOIL request a few weeks ago to the assessor and to the clerk's office, and the question I had was mainly, and the gentleman before me just brought it up, in terms of, what's the economic impact to the town of Ramapo? We know when the utility company in the state wants to make a change, we knew how much the economic impact potentially would be. We know that when there's other veterans exemptions that were brought up, I think we knew how many veterans it would impact and how much dollars we were talking about. Do we have a sense of how many multifamily dwellings that this would impact in the town of Ramapo? Not only the ones that are currently built, but the ones that are proposed to build, because my good friend Mr. Wagshell here, who's a big developer and a successful developer, I'm not sure if maybe him or some of the other property owners are driving this law to be rushed through because there's an economic benefit to them. People are always suspect of that because of what the history of Ramapo is. So without knowing that, and the answer I got was, regarding the assessed value, was, in response to your FOIL, please be advised that no such records exist, which is fine. Any dwelling, two-family plus or more, theoretically might be eligible under the law. So anything more than a two-family dwelling and up, so an apartment building or any other multifamily dwelling establishment within Ramapo could qualify. And not codifying or having an idea of what the total assessed, at least the total assessed impact could be, I think is something that you should consider, because there is an economic impact. It may not affect the 12 villages, but it will, because it's all one pot of money. And to not have that number in front of you before you make a decision that will be majorly impactful upon the current residents of the town of Ramapo, I think would be short-sighted. In summary, I'd like to just recap that I think that you need more information before you can make this decision. So then we can come back to have an open dialogue. Maybe some of these answers to my question and some of the other people's questions within this room will have been answered. The county has, I think, rejected, or at least said that they don't agree with this law as proposed. I think it'll give you enough time to address their concerns and the other residents of Ramapo. So I'm hopeful, again, that you will prove your own planning board wrong and not approve it tonight with a predetermined decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else care to speak at this time? I think somebody has their hand up in the back.
Good evening. Barbara Block, 5 Ryan Mansion Drive, Montebello. I'm listening to the whole discussion and feeling like a lot of people here, like everything is unclear. A lot of contradictions. You have an appointed planning board that you're ignoring, not explaining the reasons, not addressing the items. I heard talk about a Shabbos shul. I heard somebody say Men have to pray 3 times a day, every day. That's not a Shabbos shul. I heard talk about, we want a shul that's a 5-minute walk. You're giving a 45-minute walking radius. It's too vague. It doesn't make sense. It's just not the way an organized town should be. And I've been here since 1975. So I have a sense of what's changing, and I don't want to keep anyone from being able to observe the way that they feel they need to, but we have to take in considerations of the rest of the residents of the town who are getting tired of being pushed to the side.
Thank you. Would anybody else wish to speak at this time? Appears that no, gentleman over there. Wait a minute.
Good evening. My name is Michael Krisan, Krisan, 40 Scenic Drive in Suffern. One of the things that just reaches out at me is 500 square feet and congregations in multifamily homes seems to be very, very, very congested and a major life safety issue. I feel it in my heart. I think everybody on the planning board should feel the same way. Somebody else mentioned amenities being used. That's a much greater area to congregate and to be safe. Very important issues. House of worship. We all need them. Proposed law is a very arbitrary law that's being talked about here. Don't believe that I think it's arbitrary and without merit. It's not well thought out. There's so many other alternatives that can be presented, which should be looked at and explored and really, really fundamentally brought to you in a more professional way for the life safety of the people of the community. Please defeat this law. Please. Freedom to congregate, freedom to gather and pray together, that is fundamental. But fundamental also is life safety and the people that can be affected by this law. Who's going to be responsible for those lives? Anybody on the board? I think you really should take it to heart. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Would anybody else wish to speak? Looks like no one else wishes to speak. I'll call for a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close?
Motion by Deputy Supervisor Charles, seconded by Councilman Rossman. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Public hearing is now closed. I have one question for Mr. Klasky, if you can clarify. Would this law in any way supersede the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code?
This law would not supersede that code.
So any house of worship that was approved, if this law was adopted, would have to comply with the state code?
That is correct.
Thank you for clarifying that. Discussion by the board.
Mr. Klatsky, can you also clarify for the board how the bulk table would be applied in reference to a house of worship in a multifamily dwelling?
So I believe the question the councilman asked was how would the bulk table be applied to a house of worship unit within a multifamily dwelling, is that correct?
Correct.
So the way that would be applied, the way the law is presented tonight is that the use and bulk requirements that are currently enforced, that apply to a multifamily dwelling, would be the same ones that are applied to the unit within the multifamily dwelling structure.
As far as setbacks and FAR, what about parking?
The parking is to be determined by the planning board. That's typically not part of the bulk requirements. You consider that typically a separate category? But the answer to the parking question is that it is to be determined by the planning board.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board for Mr. Klatsky? Mr. Lynch, do you, I believe that if we were to go forward, we would need to make a secret determination tonight?
That is correct.
Is there, we have as an exhibit our planning consultant's recommendation. Can you tell us what the recommendation is pursuant to secret?
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. What Frederick P. Clark Associates has recommended to the board is that a negative declaration be adopted by the board. It also recommends that once a negative declaration is adopted, that you should sign this particular matter and have it publicly noticed. Negative declaration is not an approval or disapproval of any particular local law. It's a determination that the local law itself would not have any substantial or significant impact upon the environment, and therefore the negative declaration has been recommended by our consultant.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Let me just go back just to address one more thing. There's an exhibit we have in the record, the planning board, a memo from you, Mr. Klatsky, summarizing the planning board's recommendations on this. If you could just summarize that to us.
Absolutely. So the planning board at its meeting held on January 29th, 2019, also last night, voted unanimously 7-0 to recommend to the town board that they adopt the above local law with the following modifications. Their first modification they request is they would like the town board to consider a special use permit process. The second item is regarding bulk and area requirements that trigger variances. Area and bulk variances should be sought for the residential portion of the structure whenever such variances are needed. The third item is a maximum of 1 house of worship per tax lot that this regulation would be applicable to. And the fourth item is they request that this board revisit the R15C parking regulations.
Revisit it in general for R15C?
Generally speaking, in the R15C district.
Mr. Klatsky, can you walk me through 1 and 2 and be a little bit more specific?
I can. So, with regards to, do you mean 1 and 2 on this
Yes.
bullet list? Okay. So to consider a special use permit process, as the way the law is proposed today, it is proposed to be a site plan approval process, where there are site plan regulations which govern the review and approval of the site plan. When a special use permit process is put in force, the planning board has a wider latitude to consider various design changes to see if the site works one way or the other. That's the general summary of how the two differences between that. With regard to the second bullet, regarding bulk and area requirements and variances, in the hypothetical scenario when a multifamily structure that has a house of worship inside is too big and requires a variance, from use group, say for example X1, which is one of our requirements in the R15C zone for a 3-family house with accessory apartments. In that situation, the planning board requested the following modification, that the variances sought for that structure are sought on behalf of the residential portion, which would give the ZBA an additional latitude when considering that application than if it were coming from a house of worship. I would defer to the town attorney to see if that's even something we can do. I'm not sure if it is.
Can you give me a scenario what they're referring to? What concern are they trying to address? Because it's very vague. I'm not understanding the concern.
So, okay, can you repeat that once again, please?
I said if you could give me a specific scenario that they are referring to. It is a very vague description. I'm struggling with understanding what their concern is.
Their concern, I believe, is that a house of worship.
If I could just elaborate on that, if
Yes.
there's a house of worship being proposed in a structure, a multifamily structure, that triggers a bulk variance, it would have to go to the ZBA.
Correct.
Regardless of whether it's a house of worship or a residential home. If it goes into the setbacks, if it oversteps the FAR, if it is in the front, the side, rear setbacks, it would have to go for a variance. So what are they referring to specifically?
So I believe what they were requesting, which I'm not saying is possible, I would defer to the town attorney to determine if that's possible, is that the application to the zoning board be on behalf of the residential units and leave the house of worship out. That was the recommendation last night.
Meaning?
Again, I would defer to Mr. Lynch on
What,
if that's possible.
they want to grant variances on the house of worship?
If in this situation
Well,
where
walk me
there are
through the
3
process,
units,
please.
right, and unit 1 and 2 are residential units, and unit 3 is a house of worship, the planning board contemplated a scenario where the 2 residential units would be seeking the variance for the, say, for example, the larger FAR. So if your FAR is 0.9, let's say, and your house of worship is 0.2, which leaves you with 0.7 remaining, and they'd like to, build up to 0.9 for the 2 residential units, they would like to see the residential 2 units come to the ZBA for their 0.45 FAR for each unit and leave the house of worship as it is. I don't believe
And how would they
believe that's
how
possible.
would they address their variances?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that once again?
How would the planning board address a variance? They're not a zoning board.
This is their recommendation to the town board.
But it's just, there's something missing in this recommendation that
It's because it doesn't represent.
Again, I defer to Mr. Lynch to weigh in on whether this modification is something that can actually be achieved.
Well, I think the planning board had an aspirational request, but as the town council member said, that's a zoning board issue. So nothing in this local law, except as it expressly states, exempts zoning board application requirements. So I think the planning board was looking to see what issues may be problematic, but at the end of the day, if you need a variance, you've got to go to the zoning board, not the planning
But
board.
Mr. Lynch, clarify this if I'm understanding perhaps a different angle to this. If this house of worship that triggers a site plan and brings it to the planning board, they then go to the zoning board for the variances, that doesn't grant the final approval, they still have to come back to the planning board for site plan approval, correct?
That's the normal process.
Mr. Lynch, on number 1, could you elaborate on if the board were to consider a special use permit process? How would we go about that?
Well, a special permit process is really a legislative finding that, in this particular situation, a use is allowed subject to reasonable conditions. You could have a special permit requirement, you could not. In this particular proposed local law, it's basically delegating to the planning board to set the reasonable conditions. So, special permits are one mechanism, but usually the planning board has much more flexibility in setting conditions.
Thank you.
Do we want to address the question of the secret issue first, members of the board? We have a recommended negative declaration from Frederick P. Clark, our planning associates. Does anybody on the board wish to make a motion regarding a determination pursuant to the State Environmental Quality Review Act?
Moved.
Motion by Councilman Weissmandel to adopt the negative declaration. Seconded by Councilman Rossman. Discussion on the motion. Anybody wish to discuss? I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, carries 5-0. Negative declaration pursuant to SEQA was adopted. Let's discuss now the proposed local law. Anybody have any comments or discussion? Mr. Lynch, I'll ask you, if we were to approve it, we have an adverse GML. We have, I believe, a recommended response to the GML issues. If you can walk us through that.
No, that's correct. Should the town board wish to adopt this, because of the county planning's disapproval, would require a supermajority vote. It also requires that the town board would indicate the reasons they disagree with the county planner. The town attorney's office, together with our consultants, has looked at the comments by the county planning department and believes that certain comments can be addressed despite the recommendation against it. If you would like, Mr. Supervisor, I can go through the comments. Comment number one, the proposed response is that the current zoning law authorizes houses of worship as uses by right, subject to site plan approval by the planning board. Therefore, no special permit is required, and the amendment presents no reason to require a special permit. The planning board, at the time of site plan review, can adequately ensure proper design of the site to address issues regarding parking and impact on adjacent properties. In addition, the proposed house of worship does not meet the bulk requirements for a multifamily dwelling. Variances will be required from the Zoning Board of Appeals. That also was commented on just in my response to questions by the town board member. Comment number two, the local law is to be, will be revised to remove all references to the R15 zoning districts. That's just simply a typographical. R15 will not be part of this proposed local law. Comment number three, the current zoning law authorizes house of worship as of right, subject to site plan approval. It's the same comment as with regard to number one. The planning board can address the parking and other requirements. Comment number four, the proposed local law will apply to both existing multifamily dwellings as well as new multiple family dwellings. Comment number five, the bulk requirements for the proposed house of worship shall be the use group for the multifamily dwellings in which the house of worship is located. The reference in column B-1 to definition section establishes the bulk standards regarding the applicable bulk requirements for the house of worship. As previously noted, the proposed house of worship is a use by right, and the town seeks no basis, to make it a special permit use. Comment number six, the planning board at the time of site plan review can adequately ensure proper design and address all issues. In the event there's a need for any type of a variance, that will be addressed by the zoning board. Comment 6A, the planning board at site plan review, again, as previously noted, can address any site plan issues, and the zoning board, if required, can address any variance issues. Comment 6B, same response. Issues of lighting, traffic, other matters can be addressed and will be addressed by the planning board in any application, specifically on a case-by-case basis. Comment number 6C, again, the planning board during site plan review will determine any additional off-street parking requirements on a project-by-project basis. Comment 6D, issues with regard to safe access will also be part of the planning board review, and the planning board normally looks at all those particular issues. All the projects would still be in compliance with the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code. That would not change whatsoever. Comment 7, the applicant, when applying for site plan, will be required to demonstrate absolute and full compliance with the membership requirements of the proposed use. And after approval, if issues regarding compliance arise, the town has the authority to investigate and enforce the requirements of zoning law. With regard to comments number 8 and number 9, those will be complied with by the town.
Can I ask you a question regarding that recommendation?
No, the public participation is over.
But that was not in the public record,
It's
so we
over.
could comment beforehand.
No, sorry. Discussion by the board at this point?
Are you addressing number 10, Mr. Lynch?
Comment number 10. Okay.
Which particular, so let me just address that one second.
I believe it's the same answer.
Your
about the planning.
comment number 10 talks about, from the county, talks about a neighborhood house of worship is not permitted in a multifamily residential dwelling on an undersized or non-conforming lot. The response to that particular comment is, again, if it's not bulk compliant, that a ZBA application has to be made. If it's not bulk compliant and the ZBA does not grant any variances, in that particular case, the application can be denied. And with regard to buffer and additional parking, again, those are site plan matters the planning board can address.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Any further discussion from the board or questions for Mr. Lynch? Or does anyone have a motion to make?
I'd like to just clarify a few points before we make a motion on this. As a resident of Muncie, I've lived there all my life. I was born and raised in Muncie. I've seen Inner Muncie evolve from a single-family development to a multifamily development. Growing up, the average neighborhood shul was a downstairs, sometimes a garage, sometimes a small addition attached to homes. Most of the neighborhood consisted of neighborhood shuls. And then there was the community shuls on Maple Avenue, on Main Street. And these community shuls were the weekend shuls where we walked a little extra, where we went in the weekdays where there was parking for cars, and some of us walked. As Inner Muncie evolved into a multifamily zone that didn't allow shuls, two things happened to our neighborhood. One, it forced more of the large community shuls into the neighborhood to accommodate the needs of the existing residents that have a innate need to pray within the vicinity of their homes. And it also triggered a tremendous inconvenience to people on Shabbos and the weekends to have to walk quite distant to shuls. I think that I'm hearing a concern and a fear from our resident neighbors from other parts of the town that somehow this law would trigger additional new shuls. It would trigger an influx of shuls to move into this specific neighborhood. I don't believe that to be the fact. Shuls, churches, houses of worship serve a need for a constituency. My office is on Madison Avenue in Spring Valley. I have 8 or 9 churches within arm's reach of my driveway. It's there because it fits, it works, and the municipality allows it. But this is driving churches. These are churches that are open on Sundays and weekends, and people drive there from as far away as New Jersey and Westchester. I meet the people, they ask me if they can use my parking on Sundays, and I chat with some of them, and I hear this a lot. On the other side of the coin, a neighborhood house of worship is, like I said before, and I'll say it again, is very similar to a community function. This is just allowing a use within a neighborhood that conforms to the style and character of the neighborhood. The neighborhood is multifamily dwellings. By now, many of the streets have been completely transformed to multifamily dwellings, and the hardship that it has imposed on the residents is transparent by drive through the streets of Inner Muncie, and there are a large handful of very large shuls that are incomplete. And the reason for that is that building a shul of that size and magnitude puts a tremendous financial burden on a small congregation. At the same time, you have streets like Francis Place that has been forced into Shul Central, where we have a number of very large congregations building buildings within a vicinity that would not have happened if we would have encouraged and accommodated a specific need by allowing neighborhood shuls on different blocks. I don't think it's realistic to think that there'll be more than one shul on a specific site. The norm. Shuls serve neighborhoods. Nobody's going to spend the money and go through the trouble of building a shul that he won't have minyan for. He won't have, if he doesn't have a congregation supporting and congregating at this shul, there's no point in building or spending the resources for that shul. And that applies to the tax issue, which I really don't want to get into, because that is not what we are addressing, but it does answer the question. I understand the concern. I myself am a taxpayer. It is a valid concern that the residents of this town have about rising taxes. And the answer is, I personally do not believe this law would trigger additional shuls more than we have or would have had with the matching population. I think it's just a utility that will allow shuls to be built in a neighborhood setting to accommodate the needs of the residents of that particular area. We have a planning board, we have a zoning board, and their jobs that they do very well is to look at the site plans and address the needs and concerns of a neighborhood from a site need and a site perspective, to hear the neighbors' comments and to address that and have smart planning. Our strategic plans that we are working on now is going to address some of the global issues. This is not a global issue. This is a specific conversation of we have zoning on a large tract of land within Muncie that has a large population that frequents and uses houses of worship that cannot afford to build houses of worship in their immediate neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Weismandel. Anything else from the board? I would just comment that I think it's also comparable to storefront churches that you could see in Spring Valley on Main Street. I know there's at least one, maybe more, churches on the ground level that are occupied by congregations that use them on a regular basis. And in the same building above it, there are apartments, residential units. So I don't see it as drastically different in spirit or in function from a use that's already widely known and used in the United States, frankly. Anything else from the board? Motion?
Yes, I have some comments.
Yes, Deputy Supervisor Charles.
I think that based on your comment, Supervisor, you are absolutely correct. There are a lot of storefront churches in Spring Valley and other areas throughout the United States, in New York City, wherever you decide to go. Upstate New York, they have them as well. I think that we have many already existing shuls that we're not aware of. And there's a safety issue that many people talk about. We want to make sure the people are safe. Well, if we don't know they're there, then we can't make sure that they're safe. And they're there. So there has to be a way to leverage the taxes versus what they pay for permit fees, et cetera, in order to make them whole. And that's not our job. That's someone else's job to figure out, and we'll have that conversation as to what that will be when that time comes, if we need to. At the end of the day, we need to be able to make sure that the people are safe. And this is already happening. It's not anything, there's no new phenomena here. So we want to be able to get into those houses, make sure that the people are safe, and make sure that they have a place to worship. And we don't have to worry about the complaints that we had before about, oh, well, we didn't know that someone was there, and we had some type of tragedy where there could be a fire or there could be some kind of other incident. So if someone decides to do this, then we know they're there because they have a permit and because we'll have an inspection and because we'll know how many people are allowed. Deborah, please stop doing this, okay?
Talking about a special permit, which is the
Please,
planning board.
let's not have any back and forth.
Please. And you're entitled to your opinion, okay?
All right,
The
enough.
fact of the matter is that this is what I know to be fact. They already exist. We want to make sure that they're safe.
But you're talking about like.
Please.
Therefore.
Saying don't give them a permit.
Therefore,
That's correct.
we need to make sure that the planning and zoning director, as well as the building inspector, make sure that they are safe and they have the permits that they're supposed to. Is that not your position, Mr. Klatsky?
That is correct, and if I may, I can clarify it a
Would you
bit more.
Please do.
So typically with the place of assembly, our building inspectors and fire inspectors have the opportunity to visit them on a, on a scheduled frequency to inspect.
On an annual basis.
Yes.
On an annual basis, to inspect the safety of the building for both fire code and building code as adopted by New York State, and to ensure their compliance. At the moment, since we don't know they exist, and with regard to a permit, we're talking about a permit from the building inspector, not a planning board permit
Correct.
for the character of the community. I think what we're referring to is a certificate of occupancy
Correct.
and a place of assembly, something that gives us the right to inspect.
That's correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Klasky, for
You're
clarifying.
welcome.
Anything else from the board? Anybody wish to make a motion? Motion by Councilman Rossman. What's your motion, sir? To approve the proposed local law.
Can we hear you, please?
I just ask, remind everyone to speak into the microphones. There's a motion by Councilman Rossman to approve. I'm going to ask, will you include the recommendations of the town staff in terms of responding to or overriding the general municipal law
Yes.
reviews in your motion?
Yes.
Very good. Is there a second to the motion? Second by Councilman Wenunu. Discussion on the motion? I think we have a chance to express our opinions. Anybody
Mr.
else on the board?
This is as advertised.
Well, yes, except that one of the responses of the GML would be that we would delete the reference to the R15 zone
So it's
from
as
the
a-
law, because that's an error. Would that be right?
As amended.
That's correct. So
So
it's just a deletion, not an addition, as amended.
Thank you. Very good. So there's a motion, there's a second. Any discussion from the board?
Yes, the only discussion I have in reference to the planning board's comments
Mhm.
about the maximum of one shul per tax lot. I think that's a reasonable restriction.
I think it is too. I have a question for council. Is that something that we can impose as a condition as part of this, if we adopt a proposed local law, if it wasn't noticed?
Any reasonable condition that doesn't substantially change the law, you could adopt. If the board is of the belief that it would be a substantial change, then you would not adopt it now. You could adopt something later on or amend your local law.
I guess the first question, there's a motion on the floor to approve it as noticed with the deletion of the R15. Mr. Rossman made the motion. Councilman Rossman, do you want to modify your motion so that we would also impose a condition, as recommended by the planning board, that there be a maximum of one house of worship under this proposal, under this new local law, permitted per tax lot? Okay, so that's so amended. Will you second it, Councilman Wenunu? So now the question is, we have a proposed local law that's amended to reflect that the R15 zone would be, the reference to the R15 zone would be struck, would not be applicable in that zone, and that there'd be a limitation that no more than one house of worship could be permitted at most per tax lot under this local law. Any discussion on that motion?
Discussion.
Very good. Then I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Is anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Carries 5-0.
Mr. Supervisor, I think it's important to note as well.
We'll wait 2 minutes for the room to settle down. Well, let's wait a moment. Yeah.
I didn't prepare it as like, I think
We'll live. We'll live.
Oh,
Yeah, no, he's busy.
Mrs. Supervisor, I was trying to note for the record as well that
Yes, Mr. President.
as part of the moratorium that is now in effect, we are revisiting many and all of the regulations in the different zones, which
Ladies
addresses...
and gentlemen, if you want to stay for the meeting, please have a seat. If not, if you could please exit so that the board can continue with the meeting. They have several items on the agenda. We thank you for your participation, and you're more than welcome to stay.
Which addresses another comment from the planning board regarding revisiting the occupancy parking.
We'll have an opportunity to do that. Absolutely. It's all right. It's all good. Okay. Why don't I go into item D under public hearings, setting of a public hearing date for a local law authorizing real property tax exemptions to nonprofit organizations that purchase property after taxable status date. I'll call upon Mr. Shedler, our assessor, to explain the purpose of this.
Yeah, last year, the New York State Assembly and Senate.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to converse, please do so outside. Let the board please continue with their meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Supervisor, members of the board, and the public, last year, the New York State Legislature passed a law which the governor enacted that allows municipalities to opt into a law that authorizes a real property exemption for non-for-profits when they purchase a property after taxable status date. So the way it works right now, and there's actually a couple properties that are on tonight, is if, let's say, one of them is the Village of Montebello, buys a property in the middle of the year, they have to wait almost a whole year in order to get their exemption approved. And the process is, and this is a law that the state legislature wanted, is they have to go through the state legislature, both houses, and then go to the governor to get approval. It's a very tedious process. The legislature wanted to remove a lot of these items. There's numerous small exemptions throughout the state of New York. We have a few on tonight. Just multiply that times the number of towns there are in the state. And this bogs down the Real Property Tax Commission, Assembly Commission, and local government. So they're trying to streamline it. If it's enacted, it has what happens, like, there's a few group homes on tonight, and the Village of Montebello took title to a piece of property, and now what they would do after this law is enacted, they would petition my office. We would make a determination. If they disagree with our determination, they would go to the Board of Assessment Review and go through that process. So it's pretty much no different than going to the state legislature, because the state legislature basically goes on my recommendation. So it is a way to cut out several months of time for this process. And not only time is energy, not only at the state level, but at the local level. It's a tremendous amount of effort.
How far back can this go?
It actually would take effect immediately, so anything before the date that it gets enacted, and I defer to council as far as timing, it's not retroactive.
Got it.
So.
And would one have to be in contract by a certain date, or it would go from year to year through the year?
What I was told, basically, if the statute says is, let's say if it's enacted today and it goes into effect, let's say 30 days from now, as of that date, it would be, they would have to close on that property after that date.
Any more questions for Mr. Shedler? So we would need, if we wanted to do this, we need to schedule a public hearing.
One more question. So if somebody were to come in for this relief, is this something the assessor would handle, the town board would handle? What would be the process?
Yeah, walk us through how it would work.
Yeah, it's a good question, Mr. Councilman. Basically, the property owner would petition the assessor, file an application with my office. my office would review the application, inspect the property, determine whether or not the exemption was applicable. If we did, then we would grant the petition. There's a whole series, it's a whole process. Again, even though it is tedious and it is a process for us, it's still less tedious than the current law, because taxes get adjusted, and there's a whole series of processes that we handle. But again, it's not the town board that handles it, it's that we handle it. If there's a disagreement with the assessor, they do have a right to go through their judicial process, similar to if they filed an exemption during a normal period.
So just to really simplify this, if this is passed, and this is a law that's authorized by the state of New York, if this is passed, you would have that discretion, and you would have to make that determination instead of Albany?
Yes.
Okay.
What do other people do? Other towns, have you heard anybody else that's...
A lot of the other towns are on Long Island. I mean, the New York State Assessors Association was in favor of the legislation. We thought it was a wave. What we're trying to do is remove this legislation from the books of all the committees, because they're spending all this time on this legislation when they should be working on, you know, a lot of the other legislation that needs more attention. So our board was unified on it.
Thank you. Any further questions to Mr. Shedler? I have a question for the town clerk and possibly for council. If we were inclined to schedule a public hearing, what are our constraints? There's no GML process,
It's
so we
just
don't...
the notice requirement has to be published, and I'm not sure it's 5 or 10 days for this type of...
I'd recommend 10 days if you could do that. I mean, if you want to make it shorter, it's up
Yeah,
to
I
the
mean, our
board.
next town board meeting is February 13th. That's 14 days. That's cutting it close, I think. Why don't we go to, what would the next meeting be? Is it the 27th of February?
13th is 27th.
27th,
All right. Anybody wish to make a motion?
I make the motion.
Motion by Deputy Supervisor Charles, that's to hold a public hearing on the proposed local law on February 27th at 7 p.m.
Okay.
Seconded by Councilman Weissmandel. Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Carries 5-0. So we'll ask the town clerk and the town attorney's office to make the appropriate public notifications for February 27th at 7 p.m. Thank you, Mr. Shedler. And then we have one more item under public hearings. As you will recall, I think it was back in November, we held a public hearing and closed the public hearing on a proposed local law which would change the size limitations on accessory apartments. Under the current local law, an accessory apartment is limited to 1,200 square feet, and there was a proposal to increase it to 1,500 square feet. We have it on the agenda tonight to see if the board wants to, having closed the public hearing and the period for public comment, if we want to adopt a resolution on that or not. Discussion, motion, questions? Anybody? All right, looks like there's no motion pending. We'll table that and move on to the rest of our agenda.
Mr. Supervisor, if I could ask, we do, for you to take an item out of order, we do have some representatives in reference to a maintenance agreement here from Enterprise. So we would like to, if the board would so allow, we would like them to come up and make their presentation.
Given the lateness of the hour, I would let them do that. We will obviously have any discussion with the board or decisions during the course of the meeting after we have the public comment period. But if Enterprise is here and wishes to address us, we would appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. I'd like to, I'm happy to introduce to you Kevin Diltz, and who's here as well? Okay, Ryan. So as the town board knows, we recently went into a fleet, we have gone into a leased fleet management system with Enterprise. You've noticed that we've reduced the number of vehicles that we have. We're now on GPS. We're using fuel-efficient vehicles. Thus far, we've been exceptionally happy with the vehicles that have been delivered to us. I believe they're now almost all out on the road. When Enterprise first came to us, they brought to our attention a potential opportunity for doing maintenance for us, and we would like to give them the opportunity to present this to the board, and then we will have, you have Mr. Lynch and myself here to discuss the financial savings aspect potentially of what might happen here.
Very good. Gentlemen, please.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mona, for the introduction, Council. So, as she mentioned, my name is Ryan Forrest. This is Kevin Diltz with Enterprise Fleet Management. I'm responsible for bringing on new business for Enterprise, and we partnered up, John and myself, about last year at this time when I met Mona as well. And we now currently, yes, lease vehicles for the entire town and for all the light, medium duty vehicles. Kevin manages a book of business for existing municipalities and commercial entities of about 1,000 vehicles spread across different organizations. So our job as your account team is to lower the average age of the fleet, do it for less than what you guys are currently spending today, and using the buying power that we have on the Enterprise rent-a-car side, help leverage our relationship with manufacturers, the resale market, different funding structures, and the reason we're here today, maintenance options for town of Ramapo and over 50 other municipalities throughout New York to take advantage of as far as the maintenance piece goes. So the program itself, not only is it cost effective, but it allows you to budget your expenses for the life of the vehicle that you have it with us. Allows the shop to free up the mechanics' time to focus on the bigger equipment, the big trucks and lawnmowers, equipment tools, things like that we don't do, and gives businesses in the community some work as well. So the process is very simple, just as if any one of us were to go to a local mechanic to get the oil change done. The town is taken completely out of the process other than the driver going in and dropping the vehicle off. Enterprise negotiates everything. The town pays one flat rate, which again is fixed for the life of the term. So this time I'll turn it over to you guys. You had a bunch of questions fired at you all night, so it's your turn to fire them back at us.
Let me just have you read the list of items, a sample list of items that are included in this type of maintenance. So what does it cover?
Yeah, it's inclusive of, the only thing that's optional for you guys is brakes and tires. Those are the only wear and tear items that we can either put all in or take all out. I mean, as far as the rest of it goes, it's probably easier because everything's included from oil changes up to engine replacements, towing. It's probably easier for us to include the things that aren't covered because it's a shorter list. Oil between changes, this is the one that raises the most questions. Let's say, you don't need your oil change for every 6,000 miles. That's the manufacturer standard. If the vehicle is getting in every 2,000 miles for an oil change, well, there's something wrong with that vehicle, so let's get it in there, check it out. It doesn't need it every 2,000 miles or something in that example. So that's why oil between changes. Gas and parking, obviously, insurance-related repairs, car washes, obvious neglect or abuse, non-factory installed equipment. So like if it has like a crane on the back of it, we're not going to be doing maintenance on that. And motor vehicle safety and emissions inspections. Most stuff is pretty common, but someone approached the question at one point in time, so we have to put it on there.
You don't cover body damage, for example?
Correct.
Or
Yeah,
any kind of damage caused by a third party?
Correct. Yeah, strictly maintenance that you do at like Goodyear, things like that.
Let me ask a question. I'm not sure if you have the answer tonight. What currently, under the fleet that we have, that we lease from you, what warranties do we already have that might be duplicative of what would be covered under this agreement?
So it's a great question. We do have the answer. There's no duplicate. What we basically do is we take the vehicle. Let's just use a Ford F-150 for an example. We'll go directly to Ford and we'll say, hey, Ford, what is your standard F-150 going 10,000 miles a year going to run for the next 5 years on average? And they'll say, $150 a month, brakes and tires included. Perfect, that's what we charge you guys. So it's basically like an insurance policy for maintenance as far as the town goes.
Does it only, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Does it only apply to the vehicles that we get from you?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Would you do it for other vehicles?
We would do it, we only do it on new vehicles moving forward that are leased through Enterprise. Enterprise only provides vehicles that are under CDL, commercial driver's license, so we can do it for more. It's just, for right now, it's what we lease currently for you guys.
I think almost all of our vehicles are now converted outside of the police department, which we will entertain in the future. But I believe all of our vehicles that are below CDL are now currently on this fleet.
Correct.
Everything outside of the big dump trucks that you guys are operating has now been flipped over to us.
You mentioned a mechanic. Are you taking it to a Ford dealership, or what are you doing with the car?
So we could take that to, if it needs to go to Ford, say if there's a warranty issue, something like that, yes, we would take it to a dealership, because obviously they would get that, the proper coverage. Outside of that, we go to any major provider, Mavis, Jiffy Lube, most mom and pop shops now are on our program. Nationwide, we're over 30,000 shops are enrolled with us. So you cannot go far without finding someone that can take care of a vehicle.
And I think they mentioned in terms of some sort of economic development aspect of it, that this would be sharing, they would pay and make the agreements with local shops around here based upon what, if we had outreach and wanted to have it done. So if the local Midas was available or any other, they would work with us to make an arrangement with them.
Correct. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I know, you've got that.
You mentioned that you picked up the car as well? Pick up the vehicles?
We do not pick up the vehicle. We won't.
So it'd be our responsibility to get it?
Correct. There's 7 within a 5-mile radius of the town.
Is there any sort of claim process, or, how simple is it if transmission goes on a vehicle, what do we do?
So we're literally taking it, if a transmission goes on the vehicle and you have our full maintenance program, we're literally taking it and fixing it. It's that simple.
So I just want to mention that currently, this will not affect our CSEA contract. We're not looking to have any employees fired. It's simply a matter of easing up on the garage, and I believe we had 1 or 2 positions open in the garage. This would actually most likely allow that, this maintenance plan will allow us to continue in a positive way. And I think that it covers almost everything that we were looking for. We currently have staff that this is on a maintenance schedule. We have a GPS system that's built in. It's called GeoTab. And once we go ahead and move forward with this project, if you so desire, we will raise the level of what is kept in the memory of that GPS, which will give us much more details about what's going on with the vehicle right on the computer. As of right now, the department heads of the highway department, the building department, the town board, the supervisor's office, you have access to knowing exactly where every vehicle is, whether or not a driver is speeding, whether they're driving recklessly, whether they're outside of what we'll call a geofence. And the next level of that coverage will be the actual maintenance. So tell us this vehicle has to go in. We can set up a policy that would allow the garage or designated individuals to be the ones to take the vehicle from here to the maintenance shop, wherever it is that you're designating.
I have a question. It's probably for the finance department, and you may not have the information available tonight. I understand if you don't. Would we be able to get a breakdown of what right now we've spent last year, the year before, for example, on equivalent repairs? I understand part of it, if some of it is our employees' labor, it has to be calculated. But if we took it out to outside shops or had to pay for parts, for example, if we can get an idea on that, so we can compare, apples to apples with what the cost would be under the plan.
I think the Enterprise might have that for us.
I was going to say, actually, if I could just kind of assist John, when we were working through in the beginning, we anticipated your maintenance conservatively probably just shy of about $130,000 that the town was spending on these particular vehicles. This cost for a 12-month period, so not even at this point, but a full 12-month period would be less than $45,000 a year.
And the number you calculated, the $120-something thousand, was that based on what? I mean, what did you include?
That was based on the age of the vehicles, just because of the age of the repair, and that was on what you guys were spending last year.
It was the age of the vehicle would have been older.
Right.
Correct, older, so you guys wouldn't have data moving forward for the newer fleet, but I'm just basing it on what you guys,
No, that's a good point.
what we did together last year.
I don't know, Mr. Lynch, if you could answer what I asked.
Off the top of my head, I'd have to research that specifically on the new fleet, comparing one option to the other option.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Given the fact that these are new vehicles, so in theory, they're under the warranty of the company. If we were going to do this ourselves, and just deal directly, hypothetically with Ford, right?
Yeah.
In theory, be cutting you out at that point? Or like, what are the benefits going with you as opposed to dealing directly with the manufacturer warranty?
So you're saying like so just so I can understand, so if you're saying like, hey, Enterprise, we don't want the maintenance program, we're going to do it.
Cars from you, hypothetically, right? So in theory, all of those are under warranty. Would that be
So they're under standard manufacturer warranty is 3 years, 36,000 miles. These vehicles are going to be kept at least 5 years for most of them. That's what the term set. Basically, the warranty only covers certain things in the vehicle. It doesn't cover everything, as I mentioned. It doesn't cover oil changes, not brakes and tires, things like that. So what this would do is essentially pay for, you guys would be able to fix your costs for 5 years and know exactly what you're paying, not have to worry about if things came out of warranty. And really the big repairs, there's a reason they only go up to 3 years and 36,000 miles. The big repairs come in years 4 and 5. That's when the heavier duty things start to go, like the transmissions, that kind of thing. And you would be, sure, you're overpaying in years 1 and 2, and you're underpaying in years 4 and 5, and year 3 is a wash.
I mean, we understand there was a benefit to having a fixed expense, so we know the worst, but I think you raise a good point too, Councilman Warner.
And do we add stuff to the vehicles? I'm assuming some of these vehicles we add. Do
Yes.
we do it for us? Or
Yes.
We do.
So you do it for us, like we have lights or whatever, that comes from you?
Yeah, you guys get a vehicle from us that's licensed, tag, title, ready to go, and like upfitted, everything. It's just turnkey ready.
As a matter of fact, they're actually now doing our registration as well, and the only thing that they don't do is put the town logo on the vehicle. But other than that, it comes ready for us to go.
A truck, hypothetically, break it down, do you provide the towing service as well? Is that
Correct.
All incorporated in that cost.
Any more questions from the board?
Would you mind making a copy of what it is that you're reading off of? Does that also have pricing on it, what the costs are?
We have an example for one of the vehicles. We compared our pricing versus our third party that we would compare
Not
NADA.
even as far as comparison, more just to get a sense.
Yeah, I got it all right here.
Yeah, we can give you a lead behind. What I read off of was a sample, and on the other side, you'll kind of see some expense detail breakdown. What we do is, Kevin was kind of starting to allude to, NADA is a third party. It's just anyone can go on, just compare NADA. They collect data for everybody, and what we do is we break that down on a cents per mile, what they say average maintenance costs, and we broke it down on a cents per mile of what our maintenance rate is, and typically it's about 2 to 4 cents less than
the industry.
Yeah, the industry average there.
Just so the board is aware, we'll have to try to pull out, although I'm not sure that it's so easy. Our central garage is a separate department. You spent approximately $1.7 million last year on the central garage.
Right.
Obviously, that includes the maintenance of the larger trucks, but that was the number that was spent last year.
If I could just kind of jump off one other point that Mona made, the cost savings is great, I always say, but the real benefit we've said is the being able to fix the cost, but it's also freeing up the mechanics' time. And the third piece is the data collection. So we're kind of shifting towards a very data-centered world where we used to just drive the vehicles until the wheels fell off. Now it's more analytical, and there is a right time to sell the vehicles, and being able to capture the data from Geotab is helpful, but also being able to have the maintenance pull through as well when we're going to sell the vehicle on your guys' behalf is going to be huge. a big impact to the
Do
town.
you have a guaranteed turnaround time from the time the vehicle goes in?
There's no guarantee turnaround, but there is, I mean, I kind of go back to having the 2 million vehicle enterprise rent-a-car name behind us, that when the shops that we work with see Enterprise's name, like that vehicle's in, it's out. It's just think about it as Enterprise rent-a-car. We need that thing on the road burning gas or we don't get paid, and that we take the same philosophy with you guys as well. No, you know.
So there are no loaner cars or anything like that?
We can include it. We don't recommend it because the numbers don't, make sense. Enterprise rent-a-cars on the New York State contract for rental vehicles, though. So if there was something, in a pinch that you guys needed, but since we're dealing with newer vehicles, this is all going to be a lot of routine repairs, and the exception rather than the rule is going to be a long,
So is this a monthly rate or a flat rate per car?
It's a monthly. Well, it's both. It's a monthly rate per vehicle, flat.
So hypothetically, a car gets totaled. Do we have to pay you out through the balance of the term, or is that goes away with it?
It would go away at that point. Great question, though.
Go.
No, I'm sorry. I kept thinking of that.
Go.
No, just a quick question.
Sure.
There'll be a list of like local shops that are on the plan?
Yes.
And do we have our choice of who we can use?
Yes.
Or not use if we were not happy with the service?
Correct. Yeah, so people we've already vetted, people we already have relationships with, perfect, you can go right there. If there's someone locally that you want to use that isn't on the program, we can add them on, as long as they can generate a bill, which I'm sure they can. We're totally fine doing business with them.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, anybody else? If not, thank you very much.
What's the average cost per vehicle? Or is there no, I guess it depends on the level?
It depends on the level of the trucks. We ran there's so many different vehicles that you guys have. A Toyota Prius is going to run you like $34 a month, whereas a big like 3/4 ton pickup truck, Ford pickup truck, is going to be around $150, $175 a month. So the total for the 64 that we were talking was just under $45,000 for the year.
And if we decided to start at year 2, is that something you would allow?
It's not an option. Yeah, it's got to be. Yeah, it has to start within, I believe, 6 months or 18,000 miles is
And
the.
it's all or nothing, all the vehicles in the fleet or nothing?
Oh, no, you can dip your toe in the water a little bit and kind of pick which vehicles or which department might be a good fit, but as far as starting the program on as far as when the vehicle becomes in service, we want to be able to make sure that, since we're kind of covering the cost.
The vehicles that we currently have, we've gotten some of these a while ago, haven't we? Did we, no?
We started ordering them directly from the factory, but they just started to get delivered in, October, November. Just, I think October was the first delivery, so.
Great.
You're good.
All right.
What's the term of the policy?
So what we do is we fix it for a 5-year term up front, and then we may recommend you guys sell the vehicle early if it makes financial sense, and then the maintenance would stop on it, obviously, but for right now, we said.
What happens after year 2, we decide that we don't want to continue?
You can shut the maintenance off.
Oh, okay.
30-day notice, or what do you need?
No, you can just.
Whatever you guys want, we just click a button and it goes away.
We try to be very customer service oriented, so we don't want to make you feel like you're forced into doing anything.
Great. Anything else from the board? If not, thank you both very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to item 1.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll see you. Good. Have a good night. Yep. Thanks. Okay. Sorry. We'll go to item 1. We'll open up to public participation. Would anybody care to speak from the public at this time? Mr. Romanowski.
Robert Romanowski, 183 Maple Avenue, Muncie. I brought this up to you a number of times before, and maybe nothing has been done. Maybe give you some time frame of when some of these things are going to be taken care of. 2 of the items are at the intersection of Maple Avenue and Muncie Boulevard. One was the push button for the walk, don't walk signs. It's still not there. And also, a couple years ago, one of the town's street lights there was hit by a car and knocked down. Several months ago, this board passed a resolution accepting the insurance payment for the repairs on that. So you have the money to fix it. When will that be repaired? Also, one of the town's street lights fell down a couple years ago in front of 180 Maple Avenue. You said you were going to work on that and fix that. What is happening with that? Since the middle of December, a long string of the town streetlights on the south side of Maple Avenue from 179 down to Morris Court have been out. When have you done anything about that to get them repaired and get them back on so the lights are back on? I have a question about that. Also, coming out of Muncie, and with the bridge that goes over where the Muncie Glen area is, there's a whole bunch of town streetlights that are put up on Route 59 there, going over the bridge. A couple of them are on, and a number have been out for over a year and a half now. What's the situation on that? When are those repairs going to be made?
Thank you. Ms. Montez, do you have information about that?
Yeah, Mr. Supervisor and Town Board, Mr. Romanowski has given us a list. I'd like to request that he hand that to the town clerk in writing. We will follow up on that. As the Town Board is aware, we just recently purchased the street lights. These lights were all out, and Orange and Rockland was previously.
No, these aren't the Orange and Rock, the ones they did on the Maple Avenue reconstruction.
I understand. I was just going to finish saying what happened there. Orange and Rockland had the key to these lights in order to fix them. They couldn't find them. We just recently had to get new copies because there's a box that's locked on them. Two of the supervisor's staff members within his office are on the O&R portal, and these repairs are in the process of being done. The board is about to approve a maintenance agreement, which is a new item on the agenda for this under new business. We ask later that you'll waive the rules and approve that so that we get a contract price. The board is also aware that NYPA, which is through the state, we're going through doing a conversion of lights throughout the town. And we appreciate Mr. Romanowski's diligence in reporting these to us. We'll make sure that they're up on the portal tomorrow, and if he has the list available for us, and we'll be moving forward to correct that situation as soon as possible.
Hopefully by the next town board meeting, we'll be able to report the status of that. I'll also ask if we can notify the highway department to address the other issues Mr. Romanowski raised about street signs.
Absolutely, as well as the push button. Right. They're waiting for the part had been ordered by the company that we deal with, and it has not been available. They're looking at changing the whole mechanism. As soon as that is available, it will be done.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Romanowski.
One more comment, if I can, man. You mentioned the passing of Mr. Farber. I want to give my condolences to his family. You know, Mr. Farber was a World War II veteran, and we're losing them very quickly. And I also want to mention, too, the death of another World War II veteran, former police chief of Spring Valley, Adam Kranek, passed away at 97 years old. He was a veteran of World War II and a 70-year member of the Spring Valley Fire Department. And I think it would be fitting that in this meeting where you adjourn, maybe you adjourn the meeting in his memory or have a moment of silence for him for his service to our country and the community. Thank you.
Very good. Good suggestion. Thank you, Mr. Romanowski. Anybody else in the public wish to speak at this time? If not, I'm sorry, getting up? Okay. Ms. Munitz.
Sure, I figured I'd give people a time. Deborah Munitz, thank you. Particularly in light of this evening, I want to revisit the recommendations that I've made multiple times before this board and in private with the supervisor and his staff. Passing local laws on the same night in the face of no emergency is poor public policy. You hold public hearings, you don't post sufficient information for the public to even understand, what is before them. And then you present new information after the public has been shut up and we're not even allowed to ask questions. And the frustration is that sometimes you're not asking the right questions and you voice concerns, which is why I'm shaking my head tonight, because there are concerns that are being voiced and you're not even delving into the real issues. And the real issue is protecting the public. I know I make a point my goal has never been to oppose a good law. Tonight, there was a need for that law, but what was put before you, what was thrown together was honestly just a travesty, and I have spent an inordinate amount of time talking to people because Montebello did pass a law that was far more thoughtful, far more complete, really did a huge job to balance, residents versus, increased usage. And there's not even the thought process when you have the planning board asking for a special permit process, when you have the county, when, I'm giving you specific reasons, and there's not even feedback. You don't even have a town planner here to advise you and to answer questions. So, it's like you ask the public to submit comments, and then you don't have, you don't even say, you know what, we're going to ask the town planner to respond to the comments. The comments on point, okay? And, everyone can sit there and say they despise St. Lawrence, whatever, but I have always said there are things that he didn't do, or he did do that I didn't agree with, but there were things that he did, and there was a rhythm to public hearings, and as much as he did rubber stamp things often, he also asked his town planner to respond and to deal with issues. And it was very frustrating to not see that there is an understanding by this board as to the process and what was analyzed, what was not analyzed. And it really was one of the most arbitrary and capricious decisions that I have ever seen this town board make on a local law in the many, many years that I've been coming before you. And there's a reason I've recommended, just take a breath, even if you have already made up your mind, pretend you're going to make a decision next time.
Well over the time.
I'm going to make another comment. You should know that regarding the local law that you just passed for the end of February, I usually complain that things aren't up on the website in a timely manner. That notice was already up before the town board made a resolution to set a public hearing. It's already up on the website with the wrong date. And so, yeah, there's such a thing as too late, but there's also such a thing as too early. So you guys will have to update that. And finally, I would like the town board to address, we had the 23rd, we had the big meeting last week, and there was no discussion of any work in progress on the strategic plans or the comprehensive plans between now and an unknown date to be in March, and I'd like to know if you could please advise the public as to, what's the process going forward. You had a conversation in October where you were going to discuss in November advisory boards versus steering committees and timeframes and things like that. And, I think that it's a huge expense. It's a big project underway. I commend you guys for getting that website up. I think that it would be good to know what the process is for responding back to the presentation on the 23rd. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else wish to speak? If not, call for a motion to close. You wish to speak, or you call or make a motion? There's a motion to close public participation. Is there a second? Second by Councilman Wanunu. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0.
Mr. Supervisor, if I could ask for one more courtesy, their item under general matters, the two gentlemen that are here came over and requested, this is in reference for permission to install the monument in the Sloatsburg Cemetery. In light of their request, I would ask that you take that item out of order.
Absolutely. Definitely. Gentlemen, if you'd like to step up, we will address item 8A. Permission to install a monument at the Sloatsburg Cemetery.
We put monuments up throughout the town of Ramapo recently, and we wanted to put one in the Sloatsburg Cemetery to recognize all the veterans, and especially the recent ones coming out of Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan. There's no cost to the town, and we have already provided to put the monument there. We would appreciate it if you would pass it and recognize our veterans Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just see if anybody from the board has any questions for you.
Sir, I just have two questions. How large is this monument?
I can't hear you. You
How large is
talk
this-
very low.
I'm sorry. How large is this monument?
What?
What's the
It's
size?
a footstone.
Size,
It's a
size.
foot. It's
Oh,
a foot. How big is it? It's a footstone at the base of a flagpole. And I'd like to just mention to the board that the town is responsible for the cemetery, and the town attorney's office has requested whatever necessary, hold harmless, I believe.
Correct, and I gave the opinion, there's no legal prohibition. They sign a hold harmless, and the town is certainly authorized to accept this dedication.
I'll just say that even though it's our cemetery, because this is the village of Sloatsburg, my office reached out to Mayor Wright from the village just to see if he had any issue or objection. He indicated absolutely not. He's in favor of the proposal.
So he did the right thing.
I'm sorry.
He did the right thing.
It's been a long meeting.
Unmeister.
we move to the other side. It'd be in front. We gave full TC a picture of the size of the monument.
Mr. Supervisor, I'd like to make a motion
Yes, sir.
to approve.
Very good. Is there a second motion by Councilman Weissman, seconded by Councilman Wanunu, to authorize the Veterans Organization to install the monument at the Sloatsburg Cemetery,
Subject to a hold harmless
subject
agreement.
to a hold harmless letter? Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Very good. Approved 4-0. Thank you very
Thank you,
much,
gentlemen.
and thank you for your service.
Thank you, thank you very much.
Have a good night.
Be safe.
Okay, we'll go on to the regular schedule of the agenda, item 2A, acceptance of the minutes of the meeting held January 17, 2019. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? And hopefully you've done that, and somebody will make a motion to approve. Motion by Councilman Wanunu. Is there a second? Second by Councilman Rossman. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed?
Abstain.
Carries, you abstain. Carries 3-0, one abstention. We'll go now to the town attorney agenda. Mr. Lynch, 3A, approval of agreements.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. These all were matters that discussed during the workshop session. This is the first one, is for Frederick Clark for a traffic study for an additional fee up to $75,000.
Mr. Supervisor, I'm sorry, Mr. Lynch, two items in these first two, although we did not make Mr. Lynch aware of it.
Oh, yeah.
The first item, we do need to get a new proposal from Frederick P. Clark, so I'm going to ask that the board remove that item
If
from
we
the
don't have an
agenda,
updated proposal, then we'll have to strike that, item A1.
as well as
And if
A3.
I can interrupt you, I also requested at the workshop on Monday some backup.
Yes, I have that for you, Mr. Weissmandel, Councilman
Thank you.
So
Weissmandel.
we're left with A2, is that correct?
Correct.
Very good. Mr. Lynch, you need to walk us through A2.
With regard to A2, this is our, as again referenced during the workshop session, media services and strategic consulting services. The fee is $5,000 per month with a total not to exceed $60,000.
This is with Alpha Rises Digital,
That
we've
is-
currently been using it since last year.
That is correct, Mr. Supervisor.
Very good. Any questions or discussion by the board? If not, is there a motion? Motion by Councilman Wanunu, second by Councilman Rossman. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. Then we'll go on to item 3B, settlement of disciplinary charges. Maybe, I'm not sure if Ms. Condon would be better suited.
Yes, I can address it.
If you could
At
do
the
it
workshop
quick.
session, we weren't
I'm
sure
sorry,
if this...
what did I miss here?
We skipped, we
A3.
withdrew A1 and A3.
A3.
Oh, A3 is out too?
Could we do this without executive session?
A1 is out, A3 is out?
settlement?
Or you just did?
Right.
Well, okay, very good, then don't mention the name.
This is a matter of the...
I'm sorry, before you go on, which of the As were eliminated?
A1 and A3, we only.
Okay, thank you. Got
resolved on
it.
A2.
Got it, okay.
So this is disciplinary charges that we discussed in an executive session at Monday's workshop.
That's correct. At the time of the workshop session, we were uncertain if it was signed. It has been signed right now, and we're recommending that the town authorize any appropriate signature to resolve this particular disciplinary matter.
Very good. Any questions by the board?
Yes, I didn't hear the details.
Oh, that's right, you
I'll
were
also
not at the
abstain
workshop.
on this.
Okay, very good. Any discussion? If not, I'll call for a motion to approve.
Moved.
Motion by Councilman Weismandel, second by Councilman Rossman. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 3-0. So we'll execute that agreement. Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Thank you, Ms. Condon. We'll go on to item 3C.
If I may, Mr. Supervisor, we have a new resolution because of the government shutdown ending. The proposed resolution just simply indicates that should the governor of New York State authorize any particular type of program for furloughed employees, that the town would be part of that.
Right, just by way of background, and we brought this up at the last town board meeting, we did a memorializing resolution. We learned that night that there was a bill pending in the state senate. It was signed, and then there was a press conference, actually, that I and the deputy supervisor attended with our assemblyman, who explained that the law had been passed. It was waiting for by the Assembly and the Senate, but was waiting the governor's signature, that if the governor signed it, every town to participate would have to enter into a resolution authorizing it. As of today, as of this afternoon, the governor has not signed it. We understand the governor has certain changes he may want to be made, that may also be affected by the fact that the furlough is now over. What we have proposed would be a resolution that to the extent that the governor signs any such bill into law, we would extend the dates due on property taxes for eligible people accordingly. Am I right, Mr. Lynch, and that would be the
Correct again.
gist of the law? Any discussion by the board?
Just a question. I have two versions.
I just handed out the most recent one.
This is it?
What
the
you
second
have,
one?
yes.
Okay.
All right, then I'll call for a motion. Is there a motion to approve the resolution? Motion by Councilman Wanunu, seconded by Councilman Rossman. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Anyone abstain? Carries 3-0. Thank you, and then we'll move on to 4-0. That's, my math is off. I wasn't counting myself.
We're on 3D.
We'll go to 3D, settlement of claims. If you can discuss that with us, please.
Yeah, we covered this in the workshop session. This is a matter that council's office, the town attorney is recommending it be settled. There's a claim against the town.
Actually, on the first one, let me interrupt you, Mr. Lynch, Crown Castle. We want to put that over to the February 13th meeting.
Fine.
There's a matter that came up by a member of the public, raised a concern. We don't know whether we can address it or not, or whether it could be addressed within the context of the settlement, but we want to have a chance to talk to Crown Castle and discuss it. So we will, with the board's consent, we'll table that to the February 13th meeting. But if we could discuss item D1.
We have to table that, or we can just approve it subject to?
I'm reluctant to approve it, because if we approve it, I think we lose any leverage in terms of trying to settle it, with the other side. Mr. Lynch, if you do the next one.
Yes, D2 is simply just a clarification of the prior settlement. We had authorized a total sum to settle it. This particular agenda item, does not increase it. It just simply allocates the settlement between two different dates, a May 2017 incident and a January 2018 incident, and it allows the insurance company to allocate the funds. The total dollars.
Our share of it.
Correct. Total dollars remain the same.
Any questions for Mr. Lynch? Is there a motion? Motion by Councilman Winanu. Is there a second? Second by Councilman Rossman. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. We'll go on to the next item, item E.
This was a matter discussed during during the workshop session. The building inspector and the fire inspector were there. The board it's indicated we should prepare a resolution, which we have, authorizing litigation. We're almost complete with the litigation papers. We will be complete tomorrow. And we do know we want compliance, not a court order, but we're going to proceed with this if the board approves it, and still try to get compliance if possible.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Any questions for Mr. Lynch? Very good. I know, Councilman Winanu, you were not able to be at the workshop. This isn't...
Is this the same thing that I called you about?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm aware.
Oh, good. Very good. Any motion?
Move.
Motion by Councilman Weismandel, second by Councilman Winunu, to authorize an injunction. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. Now we'll go to the assessor, item 4A, retroactive applications.
First item, Mr. Supervisor and board members, are retroactive exemptions. Since the new law hasn't went into effect yet, these properties will have to go the traditional way, and there are a number of group homes on here, as well as Congregation Woodridge and the Village of Montebello. These properties would, we need a resolution from the town board indicating to the legislature that you're okay with us moving forward with this process.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Shedler? So ideally, if the local law is adopted, you won't have to do this. This would be a different process.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Okay.
So we're approving this subject to?
We're recommending, correct me if I'm wrong, we're recommending it, and then it has to go to the state.
Yes, it goes to the state. What the state doesn't want to happen is them pass the law, and then the local municipality doesn't grant it.
And just so we understand, your office is recommending these exemptions. These are eligible
Yes.
properties that should be exempt.
These are all they all met the eligibility requirements.
And what happens is they purchase the property after taxable status date, so by a loophole, they can't
Exactly.
apply. Very good. Any questions? If not, I'll call for a motion. Motion by Councilman Wanunu, second by Councilman Weismandel. All in favor? Any opposed? This time it carries 3-0. And then we'll go to item 4B.
The next item is we started a plan with GAR Associates in 2016. We stopped the plan for a short period, started it up again when I got back. We finished phase 1 of the plan, way under budget, and we're looking to do the implementation of the comprehensive assessment plan, which involves training and other aspects of analytical review of our data, not to exceed the amount indicated in the resolution, and, that's just a continuation of our Plan A.
Thank you, Mr. Shedler. Any questions for Mr. Shedler?
Basically, what they do is, GAR Associates are assessment consultants. So what they do is they came in, helped us prepare a plan. We needed to have a plan in place to move forward with reviewing and analyzing data and making changes on properties. And they provide training, so they will come down to our staff and provide training. No, they provide insight and technology. So we implemented a plan already with the assistance of Mr. Klatsky of a program called Near Maps. So they helped us identify key aspects of the digital imagery, which enable us so far today to bring in over $1 million in assessment. Just that one aspect of the training was able us to actually then cut those pieces of the pie a little smaller for every taxpayer.
Great.
So it's got a huge return on investment.
Very good. Any further questions? If not, I'll call for a motion to approve. Motion by Councilman Wanunu, second by Councilman Westmandel. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. Thank you, Mr. Shedler. Now we'll go to police. We don't have the police chief here. I'm not sure if either Ms. Condon or Ms. Montel is more familiar with this item.
Sure.
Ms. Montel, sounds like you are.
As the town board is aware, we supply an officer to the Rockland County Intelligence Center. We've done this for quite some time. This is a memorandum of understanding in reference to that with the county. And the chief has recommended and requested that the town move forward with this plan.
What's the cost to the town?
I believe we're reimbursed.
Yeah, I think we get the money back from the county. Let's double check that.
It's my understanding that there's no extra cost, but it's the regular payroll expense.
Correct.
So it's our officer that's on.
Right, but the
Right.
chief told us at a police commission meeting, he felt that there was a lot of value. to the department.
And then we
That's true.
get the forfeiture money from this.
We get part of it, yeah.
And it usually exceeds over the time what we spend.
Very good. Anybody wish to make a motion?
Yeah.
Motion by Councilman Wanunu in favor.
Second.
Second by Councilman Weismandel. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. We'll go to Ms. Condon, Personnel. Item 6A, appoint court attendant relief for the Justice Court.
Yes, as we discussed on workshop, we're hiring a second court attendant. They work hourly, they're only paid when they work. So we're appointing Octavio Falzo as our court attendant, and he's eligible to start working after tomorrow.
Very good.
And that would be an addition, meaning we're going to have now 2 people as court officers? or-
Yes, because we always had more than one. You sometimes need 2 for a large crowd, one inside, one outside. And they also are not always available. So this way, we would have at least one at all times.
We'd have a backup.
And this gentleman has done this before. He's recommended by Judge Freed, who requested we consider his application, and he was cleared by the county as
Yes.
Very
condemned.
good. Any further questions? Not, I'll call for a motion to approve. Motion by Councilman Rossman. Is there a second? Second by Councilman Nunu. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. Now we'll go to item 6B to appoint 2 police officers.
Given the fact that this is an addition to what we have in the budget,
What?
this, we have.
We lost one.
Yeah,
You're short one.
he's
No,
replacing
but
somebody.
it's, whenever I passed, I've always seen that we've had one person.
You recently had to relieve somebody of their duties.
No, that's not a question, but meaning you're going to have 2 simultaneous people active.
Only when there are large crowds.
Only rarely,
That- Do we have that?
Usually, we just have one. What happened was.
Historically.
For some
Right.
large criminal cases, sometimes we'd have 2. But we used to, for years, we had 2 at a time, one in and one out.
Okay.
So we're not changing anything. It's just we're hiring someone else to be available.
We've been working with less, we've been working
Good.
with one. The next resolution is to appoint 2 police officers who are scheduled to start the academy this week. They were just cleared yesterday.
I have to ask, I'm looking at those names.
I'm sorry?
So I have to ask those names.
The name, oh yes, I'll give you the names.
Oh, I see them.
Yeah.
Are they related?
Yeah.
Well, I know
Tom
Tom is,
But I
That
don't
June?
know about Daniel, so.
Tom Buckley is Tom Buckley's son.
Okay.
But they all came off of
Yeah.
the
No, no problem, I'm just
No,
curious.
no.
Sullivan is not. I
Okay.
do not believe.
But they'll go to the academy and they'll be there until June. And so they're being appointed effective tomorrow. And the chief said that they'll be in at 11 o'clock, so if you're available.
We would try to be there and sue them, absolutely.
I'll be swearing them in.
Oh, beautiful. And just for information, Tom Buckley Senior is very proud that his son,
Should.
absolutely. Very good. Motion to approve. Motion by Councilman Rossman, second by Councilman Nunu. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. And now we'll go to item 6C, appointment of police officers.
This is a different scenario. These 2 candidates are already police officers. They don't have to go to the academy. So they're going to be appointed effective February 7th. It's Stephen Aurelio and Michael Warburton.
And that's why they're getting a slightly higher pay.
Right. The others will have their pay raised to this once they get out of the academy.
Very good.
And Mr. Supervisor, just to mention that these were budgeted for, these
Yes.
positions, so the board is aware of that.
Yes.
What does this bring us up to numbers-wise? I noticed we have a couple of retirements.
Yeah.
We've had 3 more retirements come across my desk for the next 6 weeks. So I think we were at 103,
104, I think.
I think, or 4. But then the last 2 days, we've had 2 more retirements, so it just keeps.
And we have one more that hasn't been officially announced as well.
Now,
Right.
these ones that are going to the academy, are they counted in your number?
Yes.
Yes,
Oh, that's counted towards your,
Yeah.
even, so that means even though they're not on the streets?
yes,
active.
because they're on our payroll,
Payroll,
we pay, and they get our benefits.
How many people do we have in the academy right now?
We just had, I think,
Excuse me.
3 or 4 graduate yesterday, 25th.
Right. Last week, yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they still have to, they have another 6 to 8 weeks where they're considered non-certified, where they get on-site training here.
But I think we're only going to get these 2 into the academy for this session, which
That's
was,
all.
so that, which is why there was a timing
No,
issue
glad to
for
do it
this.
tonight. Great. Is there a motion to approve the appointment of these 2 officers? Motion by Councilman Nunu, second by
Second.
Councilman Rossman. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. Now we'll turn it over to purchasing. We have a long.
Yeah,
long
thank you.
agenda.
Mr. Supervisor and Town Board, I would just like to ask, however, I received, I guess technology is what it is, and our IT department is diligently watching this Town Board meeting, and it seems like there was the information in reference to the setting of the public hearing date.
Right.
I was wondering if the board could amend that resolution subject to verifying what has already been published. The message I got is that IT can change the website. However, the information and the dates that were in the resolution were the ones that were sent to the newspaper and the media based upon the town attorney's office. So all I'm going to ask is that you amend that resolution.
Can we check what that is?
What was the date?
I can't do it the second. I wish I could.
You have your computer?
It does seem like it should have waited till we actually said it.
Move on, and then we'll...
Yes, I just
While
wanted to-
David looks it up.
Thank you very much.
What date did they send?
We're about to find out.
They're about to find out.
Stand
The
by.
13th is what's in the resolution,
Right, we made it the 27th.
so I'm not sure why you did that.
13th, was Mr. Lynch said he needed 10 days.
Yeah.
Supervisor was just giving him some breathing space.
Right, so I would like you to amend, if possible, that resolution back to where it was.
Well, the verbal resolution was correct. I think the written resolution has to be amended to reflect what we resolved. We said the 27th in our resolution.
It says I'm reading that it says February.
That's wrong. The written resolution said the 13th. That was done before the meeting, but we did not. But our resolution, we made the resolution, we specifically said the 27th to have more time.
I get that, but I believe what was noticed in the media was the 13th, which was sent to the newspaper. So all I'm
The
asking
reason
is
we
that-
put it off was to accommodate notice that hadn't been done yet.
Right.
So I don't understand.
We shouldn't have sent
The
any
media
notice
is
out
already
until
done.
after tonight.
Just on a side note, the 27th on our screen does not have...
All I'm going to ask is that subject to the town attorney's confirmation,
We're
if
going
it's
to
been
check the
noticed.
website. What does it say?
Where is the town attorney?
What did it say in the paper? How could it be in the paper if...
I don't know. All I'm saying,
That's the problem.
that's the problem. All I'm asking
Shouldn't
is
have been
that,
until after tonight.
that.
Well, Mr. Lynch will be back soon. We'll find
Right,
out.
so that's all I was asking. All I'm mentioning is that,
And also, when you speak to IT, the 27th is not listed as a date for a meeting.
okay, I'll certainly take care of that. Is that on the town clerk's?
Yeah, we have a meeting scheduled under our...
Do you have a
regular
meeting
schedule.
schedule?
No, that's our regular meeting date. It's just, no, he says it's not listed on the calendar as a meeting date, but it should be.
Shall I continue?
Please do.
Okay. So the first item, 7A on the agenda, is acceptance of the extension of the agreement. Her bus is for various one-day trips, school bus or equivalent. As I mentioned, this is simply an extension of a current agreement so that we are not going out to bid again. A lot of these items on my agenda are referenced, are like that, so I'm just going to ask that I state that once. So this extends the contract with Chestnut Ridge Transportation for 2019.
Didn't we have an agreement, or we were trying to negotiate with them to use our parking lot?
As of yes, we are, and it was revisited yesterday. I believe they're in court today in reference to an issue that they had where they are. I should be hearing back from them tomorrow. Currently, the potential plan is that they will park on the, if you're facing the stadium, 35 buses on the right side of the stadium, not too far from our maintenance building because they need a trailer there. Following the warmer weather setting in, if they need a longer-term contract, I believe it's close to $5,000 a month.
Weren't we also trading for...
That's in addition to that, but that has
Right.
nothing to do with this. That's for non-for-profits.
Right.
We've asked them to help us out with non-for-profit organizations and giving us some additional buses. This is simply the extension of the prior bid, extending it for 1 year. I just would mention to the board that after, when it's warmer, there is a potential at the Herb Reisman Sports Complex to make an additional parking pad they would pay for that, so that they could continue once the season starts, having a place to park the buses. And subject to the Highway Department, Michelle Antosca's department, reviewing that would work out.
Where?
Where we were going to put the PAL building about 20 years ago, it's, if you're at the park on 45, we own a maintenance building there.
Yes.
Behind that maintenance building, all the way on top of a hill. It's a flat plateau up there.
This is which building we're talking about?
Jean Levy Park on the...
You know where the Gene Levy Park is?
okay,
This is,
yeah, I know it.
there's a commuter parking lot, and then we own a maintenance building. We built a maintenance.
Like a metal garage.
Behind that. It's an unused parking lot at the moment.
All right, is there a motion in favor of this
Do you know
extension?
what the cost was, what we're extending, how much was it last year?
It's various. It depends on how often they do it. I don't know off the top of my head how many trips the Parks Department does. Some of it gets reimbursed because the campers pay for for going on trips. But this was
I mean, do we
a
know how
sealed
our
bid.
rates are? Like, maybe we should compare
It's a
it to
sealed
what
bid.
East Granville gets? Like, are we competitive rates-wise?
It's a sealed bid.
Okay,
Oh.
very good. Motion? Motion by Councilman Rossman, second. Councilman Wanunu, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. We'll go to item 7B.
Acceptance for the bid for submersible grinder pumps. I'm asking that the board accept the bid as listed in the resolution. Again, this was a sealed bid. Rapid Pump won the bid, and you'll see the items that are listed there for the various bid prices.
Any questions by the board? Not, is there a
Where
motion?
is this for?
What?
This is for our pump stations.
All over, whenever we need pumps.
Parts?
What?
Just parts?
Yes.
Any further questions? If not, motion. Councilman Rossman, second. Councilman Wanunu, all in favor? Anybody opposed? 4-0, carried. Item 7C, purchase of safety sashes.
As we mentioned, Mr. Supervisor, and we discussed at the town board, the town purchases safety sashes through our safety program with our police department. This year, we'd like you to accept the bid of all types advertising. Within the budget, I believe there's approximately $25,000 allocated to this. The change this year, again, this was a bid, is that we've requested that the sashes be adjustable so that children and adults can use the same size sash. We have very positive feedback, both from our police and our residents in reference to this. And we're asking you to accept the responsible bid of all types advertising.
I don't have an,
There's a buckle.
No, buckle.
I don't
And
have an
they're actually
attachment.
less.
I don't have an attachment. How much was the bid for?
I also don't have the attachment with me, but it was
So what
less
are we-
than last
What are we
time.
voting on?
What?
What are we voting on?
I'm going to, subject to the town attorney's review of it. I don't know why I don't have it either. I believe it was $1.14 a sash, but I will double check.
How many do we order?
What?
How many do we buy?
We buy $25,000 worth over the course of the year, which is
So
why we have to go out to
20,000
public
pieces.
bid, approximately.
Okay. Any motion? Motion by Councilman Rossman. Is there a second? Councilman Wanunu seconds. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. Item 7B.
Yeah.
Seven D, please.
Yes. Let me just clarify so that the public is aware, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Mr.
please.
Wanuna was asking whether there was a conflict for him, and there is not, because he potentially had a relative that could have bid on these.
I checked the address.
He did not, and he wanted to be very sure that this was not his relative.
Very good.
Because there's public here, we're on television, I wanted to be sure that that was what was they were presenting. I'm asking you to accept the proposal for integrated vehicle leasing for a street seat sweeper. The next four items, I believe, are in reference to what we have discussed previously during our workshops, as well as during the budget season. We are going to have to, in addition to approving the lease, we're going to ask that the money be moved from contingency because it wasn't in the right
Didn't we do
line.
that at the last meeting?
I don't think that we did it the last meeting. We discussed it. I don't think we did it. Correct. We wanted to do it, it was at the workshop, and we wanted to do it in the resolution per item. So,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'll ask Mr. Lynch, if we do that, will that leave us with sufficient contingency to handle any unforeseen needs?
Well, you can never judge.
No, and I
how
know,
much
you can't
need,
give a definite answer, I'm just saying,
But
will leave us with
but this
how to be
will
balanced.
certainly not extinguish the contingency.
Okay, very good.
okay, so,
Any questions? If not, call for a motion
What are we voting on?
to lease a street sweeper.
Do we have to move the funds?
And to move, and do we need a separate motion to move the funds?
I think you can do it in the same resolution. We've done it before that way.
There's no problem with that. I mean,
Very good.
So we're going to ask to amend the resolution.
Because the resolution shows the source of funds.
And you're going to add an additional line there in the beginning that now therefore be resolved that the town board of the town of Ramapo, that it hereby moves the funds, an annual amount, which I believe is 100, which is $120,000.
Is that right?
I don't have it in front of me. One second. Mr. Lynch, do you have it there, how the breakdown of that payment was? I believe it's 77,000 and $63,118.88 for a 5-year term. So each year it'll cost that amount. This year you're authorizing one of those years, but the leasing companies want to know that you're going to approve it each year within the budget, which is why it's listed this way in the resolution.
I think maybe a little bit more than that, but I see there's a couple of other attachments associated with that. The
There's different
63 looks
numbers.
like it's probably for the actual unit, and there's
Another $5,000. You're right,
Yeah.
correct.
All right. Any further discussion? If not, is there a motion?
Yeah.
Motion by Councilman Winunu, second by Councilman Rossman. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. We'll go to item 7E.
Similar resolution.
Wheel loader.
In reference to a wheel loader by Caterpillar. It is a Caterpillar. We do have an aging fleet. When our highway superintendent came to us, he had all of the vehicles reviewed. This is another lease. I'm going to ask you to do the same thing, to move the money from contingency. The total amount is $202,000 for the 5-year period of time. And we're going to ask that the resolution be amended to move the contingency as well.
Any questions? Motion? Motion by Councilman Winunu, second by Councilman Rossman. All in favor? Any opposed? Carries 4-0. Item 7F, bucket truck.
Item 7F is, as the supervisor mentioned, a bucket truck. We're going to ask that you accept All-Tech Capital Services once again for the amounts that you have listed here in your backups. We will do I believe, the 6-year lease payment on this municipal lease, and we're going to once again ask you to move the funds from contingency.
Any questions?
I'm assuming all these vehicles have some kind of a maintenance agreement associated with it? Or
These do have that standard warranty on it, similar to, correct, and
Otherwise, it would be maintained by us.
correct.
Any questions? All right, then call for a motion. Motion by Councilman Rossman, seconded by Councilman Winunu. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0.
You blinked.
I thought you were raising your hand.
It's all good.
And the last one is in reference to the backhoe loader, similar situation. The total over the course of the term is $109,000, and it was $21,000 for 5 annual payments with an additional $634 fee. Once again, we're asking you to go ahead and approve this. I actually believe this is retroactively approving this particular one. We did poll the board. We did ask whether we could move forward, and we did have 3 members because the highway superintendent had a need for this.
Any questions? Motion?
I just have to, remind me again, why weren't these in the budget?
Why weren't they put in the lines that they were supposed to be put in? It was an error as to where
Why
they...
didn't we budget for
It
it?
was an error as to where they were financed through. In other words, I believe that they were put into the general fund, and they actually needed to be put into the highway fund.
No, we're pulling the money out of contingency, and how's it going back full circle?
It won't. Next year, you will budget for it.
Okay. Any motion? Motion by Councilman Rossman, seconded by Councilman Wanunu. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. Next, we have the presentation about the maintenance agreement. It's on for discussion.
I will supply the board with a full packet, which has each car individually put on there, and I would say that if the board wanted to entertain it, you still have the next board meeting to do so. The gentlemen that were here today are very knowledgeable. They do feel that we will be saving some substantial amounts of money, and I believe Mr. Lynch would confirm that after he did his analysis during the summer, that not that Mr. Lynch, that Mr. Lynch. That he
Gets me
would-
nervous sometimes.
That he would confirm that there is potential cost savings.
I would just like some back. I mean, you said there's no one being laid off. I understand it's parts and time, but I'd like to see something on the expense side.
Sure.
Their numbers are very clear. It's clean cut.
Right.
But I'd like to see the justification on our side.
Sure. So I do believe that the central garage bills out on a monthly basis using a computer-generated system, a parts and a labor system, and they actually bill the individual departments for the services they provide for the vehicles. I believe it'll be pretty easy to get the numbers that you're looking for and simply pull out any vehicle that is CDL or above.
That would be helpful, I think.
And I'll have that for
The
you
problem
soon.
with that logic would be is that you have certain overhead costs that are not going away. So.
Right, but we'd still at least see the cold,
You get a sense of.
the flat billing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
The flat billing, that's actually not changing. The only thing that is changing is the flat billing.
Yeah.
We're not laying anyone, not laying
On
anyone
that
off.
flat bill, I'm assuming they're calculating overhead.
Right, so now they won't be billing that anymore.
To tell you the truth, I was pretty surprised, when you read this study, I was pretty surprised that they could offer this service for the cost that they did offer it to us at.
And I was surprised tonight because I was under the impression the whole time that we were going to be shrinking the department.
You are.
And that's where the savings would be. Tonight I was told that we're leaving everything intact, so.
So you
I'm
currently.
struggling with where's the savings here.
Right, so you were advertising right now for a replacement for somebody in the central garage, at least one, if not two individuals that left there, and we.
Was it budgeted for?
It was budgeted for, so there would be your savings.
You right now have 3 mechanics, and even if you take away this fleet of cars, they do all the police cars, the flat tires, the road calls, the oil, they do all the big trucks. And there are 3 of them. So,
What did we budget?
as far as I know, there were 5 budgeted last I saw. I didn't.
Yes, five individuals were budgeted.
So we can keep just the 3, and with this agreement, I need to hire 2 replacements. That's the savings.
That would be the same.
Correct me if I'm wrong, legally, we can't outsource union jobs, so,
You
and we can as long as we don't
As-
use that as the reason to eliminate the job.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's part of the union contract.
But we don't have to replace the
No,
vacancy.
you do not.
Okay.
And you're already down, 12 years ago, you had 9 mechanics. So it's been steadily
Attrition.
getting smaller and smaller.
Who's going to be managing this effort? Meaning, is this going through the central garage, or somebody's car broke? Who's going to hire?
It's to be determined, but we believe it would go through the central garage. You have a seasonal employee that was in the garage for many years who we would ask to handle this. And it's all computerized as well. So you would designate an individual to be responsible for this management.
Why don't we go on, if we can, to item 7I, USI Consulting Group.
Yes.
So we're going to hold this over?
Right. We need further information.
I do recall that you spoke to other municipalities who were using them and were satisfied with them.
Good.
Item 7I is the acceptance of the proposal to provide actuarial services to prepare the full valuation of post-retirement welfare benefits, including a determination of the annual costs and liabilities, which are required under GASB Statement Number 75. I believe we do this agreement every 2 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Every 2 years.
And this is part of the process for filing our financial paperwork.
And the fee, I think, is on the last page.
It is.
And that's-
Could I ask?
No. I'll say it out loud. This is what we need in order to file our audits, and we're rapidly moving along in 16, 17, and 18. In order to continue to get 16 done, this needs to be done because it is used in our, 17 and 18.
This is for
You need-
17
This is
and 18.
18 and 19, which is 17 and 18's audit.
Okay.
Correct.
Very good. Any further questions? If not, I'll call for a
Who
motion.
have we used in the past?
Same company for many years.
We're happy with them?
Very much.
Good.
Would be very difficult to switch gears.
No,
into
it's just-
this.
yeah.
Yeah.
Any motion? Motion by Councilman Rossman, is there a second? Second by Councilman Weissman. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. We'll go to item K, rejection of a bid. No, I'm sorry, I skipped one. Item J, grant writer F.J. Rella.
I would ask, Mr. Rella has agreed, we brought this up at our prior meeting.
Right.
Mr. Rella had mentioned that it would take approximately 6 months for him to get any kind of success or see anything working here. So we reduced the contract to 6 months at $15,000. However, I believe in deference to Councilman Wanunu, before you vote on it, I would ask, I know that he was speaking to some...
I pulled it from them already. You told me that it was done, so look, I guess we'll discuss it later. I appreciate it. So we're at 6 months?
6 months,
6 months out of a year.
15,000. And
At
if-
half the cost.
At half the cost.
Any questions? Motion? Motion by Councilman Rossman. Is there a second? Second by Councilman Weissman. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carried 4-0. And then we'll go on to item K, rejection of a bid for bollards.
As I mentioned during the workshop, we need to change the scope, so I'm asking you to reject the bid, which we received in February 2018.
Very good. Motion? Councilman Weissman, second by Councilman Rossman.
Is there a quick color? I wasn't...
I'm sorry.
What's the quick color behind this one?
Well, the reason is we're changing the specifications.
Where was this going?
All
This
over-
is going to go by town hall.
Well, so one of the reasons we're changing the chief's office, one of the reasons that we're changing the scope is it had a specific number of bollards, and we actually need more. And you have to protect the new generators that we spent substantial sums of money on. So
We're
we
gonna
have,
rebid it.
we have to rebid it.
Very good. There's a
So
motion.
there's
and a
no
second.
bollards around the generators right now?
Not yet. Let's
There
not
might
announce
be, I
that.
don't know.
Maybe we should park
There
the
might
cars
be,
there.
there might be, you
Barricade,
might want to
there's a
check
barricade
it.
that says police cars only.
It's a police tape.
The reason that we did this in the first place is it happens to be that the chief's office, it's not a joke, the parking for the police department is literally right outside the chief's office, and it's a simple...
He doesn't want to drive through? What a cool
He
parking
does not want to
spot.
drive through. So that's what started this, and then it had been recommended to us when we did a safety study on Town Hall. You did two things. One, you moved the employee parking closer to the front because the police recommended that you shouldn't have public parking right on our doorstep. So you move the department head parking against the building. And on the other side of the building, it was recommended that we continue the bollards not only by the police station, but your council room here. Another recommendation was to think about putting guardrails on 59. We don't have that option at this point in time.
All right, there's a motion and a second. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. We'll go on to item L, amendment of the resolution to accept the bid to purchase an office trailer.
That's all I have to do.
Move.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Do you want to discuss it?
Oh, we've discussed this one.
Yeah, we discussed it, and there was a
The
change.
office trailer, yeah.
Right.
Very good.
This is the trailer up.
Yes, repeatedly.
I think it was a little bit, I think the pricing was different in the prior resolution, so slightly off. And so after Judy Canetti noticed it, we're accepting Nadler.
Nadler.
Right,
They're the, aren't they like the gold standard for trailers?
right.
Okay. Very
They're
good.
they're here in the town.
They're local, right, which is good, a local business. I'm sorry, is there a motion? Motion by Councilman Rossman, seconded.
Second.
Councilman Westmandel, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. And now we'll go to item M, acceptance of extension of a bid for purchase of building materials.
We're asking you to accept, to extend the bid of Beckerly Lumber. Once again, we go out to bid for this. Beckerly is a local company. This is to extend their bid. Everyone within the town is happy with them. I do believe that the source of funds needs to be changed because it's not only the sewer department that uses this. I'm not exactly sure why. The source of funds will be line item 3448 across the board, whoever uses the bid. Correct.
So it's just an extension for 1 year.
Correct.
Very good. Anyone want to make a motion?
I'm glad they're
Motion
using
by
local
Councilman
guys.
Rossman. Any, second? Councilman Westmandel, all in favor? Anyone opposed? 4-0. Now we'll go to item N, which is instead of buying, we're selling.
Right, and this is more for the metal that it is. It's, we're asking to surplus and sell the backhoe that's not functioning very well. And for $5,000, we had Brian Spillman do an evaluation. We had the Highway Department confirm that. We're asking
Put too
you.
many zeros over there.
Does the price include delivery?
Somebody else bought one of our surplus vehicles, and it didn't even make it.
We made them tow it away.
Do we have like a hold harmless when we sell these things?
Do
Good
we
question.
need?
Do we, is
No,
that?
Do we need one?
There,
You
we
know
turn
what?
over the
You know
title.
what? You don't, how's it sold? Is it just sold as is? Like
Yeah,
Like
it's
as
as
is.
is. We turn over
Oh,
it's
okay.
a title, and these don't even, I don't even think these have titles.
They're surplus.
Right, we surplus them.
Very good. So there's a motion. We already surplused it, right? So this is
Yes.
just a sale.
There's one, you do have one.
You're
typo.
surplusing it and selling.
There is one
Where's the
typo.
typo?
There's too many zeros at the first
Yeah, but the
time.
bottom, the second.
You know, the second one you do have it. I don't know if
Thank
it's a
you.
difference or not.
Oh,
Thank you. We'll amend it.
Well, you can put
Very
an
good.
unlimited number
Then-
of zeros there.
well, motion by Councilman Rossman, seconded by
right.
Councilman Wanunu. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Sold.
So there are, Mr. Supervisor, if I could just mention
Yes.
a couple of things that are before the board. Maybe Councilman Weissmandel would like to discuss the various updates on the traffic items, and to just announce to the board that we're in the process of installing some safety railings, which Councilman will speak to you about. And I just confirmed with the state of New York, the DOT, that we will be able to make the submission in reference to adding a turning lane on Route 306 after the study is complete by our traffic consultant. And Councilman will continue to give additional information, but I just heard from the state right before the town board meeting.
Very
This is
good.
the one by Fessler?
Yes, determine whether you want to go from Mariner to Viola or from Fessler to Viola. But the state is,
Would you pay for it?
we would.
Do we have any further items under purchasing?
I don't think so.
Very good.
You just, you
You
have to
just
mention.
had a date,
Yeah.
a date that we had to clear up.
Yeah, the date. Town Attorney Lynch. I was notified by the IT department that potentially the date was mailed for the setting of the public hearing to the media. Do you happen to have that file with you in reference to setting the public hearing date?
No, I don't think I do. I'll double check, but that was the question of the 27th versus the 13th or
Right.
something?
We resolved to do it on the 27th, but apparently the resolution read the 13th, and the notice already went out.
So I'm going to ask the town board then to simply renotice, and that's how
Yeah.
we'll deal with it. If we've noticed
Well,
We'll just renotice. It's a small
27.
expense
We'll
so
do
that
it.
there's no
We have to do it.
confusion, and we'll change
How
the,
would we have noticed before?
I don't know, and I don't know why the
We should do that
IT
again.
department
We should
sent.
No, regardless, we have to renotice.
I would have to, I have
I
no.
would think.
The IT department would be the one sending out the notice?
No,
No,
all
no,
I'm
it went to
saying
the
is that, I guess
newspaper.
when Ms. Munitz mentioned it on the camera before, the IT department was watching the video because we're streaming live. They sent me an email.
I'm glad they're
to-
watching.
Yes, to mention that they can change the web, but that info and the dates were also sent by the town attorney's office last
Okay,
week.
so in the future, we won't do that.
If we did it, we don't know.
If we did it,
I-
if it went
I-
out, either
I-
way.
I don't know.
It's clear. We have one more item on the agenda, number 9, appointment of a member to committee.
10.
Number 10.
Number 10,
Yes.
mine?
Nine.
Nine.
So as the town board is aware, for quite some time, we were doing research to find candidates to sit on our ethics committee. And after a lot of time and due diligence, an individual who is highly respected within the town of Ramapo has agreed to sit on the Commission on Ethics. And we would like to recommend that the board appoint Morton Silverberg of Muncie, New York, to sit on the Commission of Ethics effective January 30th, 2019, with that term to expire December 31st, 2019.
I think we all personally know Mr. Silverberg. He's no introduction. He's an esteemed member of the bar and leader in the community. I think he'd be an outstanding choice for this committee. Is there any discussion? If not, I'll call for a motion. Motion by Councilman Rossman, second by Councilman Weismandel, to appoint Morton Silverberg. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries 4-0. And I don't think we have any new business tonight.
You did have that
We
one
have a
item of new
proposal.
business, so I'm going to ask you
Is it
to
ready?
waive the rules.
Why don't you discuss what it is? and then we'll do
Yes.
that.
We, as we mentioned, we have purchased our lights. And in between the time that they're being converted to LEDs and now, and we finish with the financing of the next stage of implementation, the town is responsible for taking care of outages. And as Mr. Romanowski mentioned, there are a few more as well. It came to our attention after speaking to the company that currently has the contract in Orangetown and Clarkstown that the pricing that they were getting was based upon a contract price, and we were getting an hourly rate. So we're going to ask you to accept the, subject to the town attorney's approval, the proposal that it's Albright?
Albright.
Albright. Mr. Howard Hellman, who has provided the service and will do so at a lower rate based upon a contract agreement with them on a per basis contract.
Any questions? I think this will start saving us money immediately because the amount we've been paying
Correct,
on an ad hoc basis is
correct.
going to add up quickly if we don't. Is there a motion? Motion by-
First waive the rules.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, is there a motion to waive our 24-hour rule? Motion by Councilman Rossman, seconded by Councilman Weisman. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Rule hereby waived. Now, is there a motion to enter into the agreement with Albright? Motion?
No retroactive.
We've held it up, we held up, we didn't.
No, in
move
other words, will
forward.
they, for anything they've done already, will they cover it under the contract retroactively, or we owe what we owe?
Based upon the board's
Starting point?
direction, I'll ask them to do that. I
We can
believe
do
we
that.
might have paid them a small
Hasn't been a
amount
lot
already.
yet,
It
but
hasn't been a
it can add
lot.
up.
We just did this, I think we just closed, what?
Yeah, last week.
How much are we talking about? Like, what are these things?
Do you have the last, I think it's about $140 usually when they go out on a repair. I'm not.
Yeah, I'm not even sure, but I know.
I haven't received any of this.
Right, the idea is to make sure that we are on contract so that it's a rapid response as opposed to having the board entertain each time they have to go out and get the approval. As I mentioned, maybe I didn't mention, Morty Becker has been trained by Orange and Rockland on the O&R portal for reporting the incidents. And he's very on top of making sure that anything that comes in gets uploaded online immediately. However, now we're responsible in certain instances to take care of it. We did not purchase the lights that are considered underground, so Orange and Rockland still has to deal with those. Other lights we are responsible for.
Very good. I think there was a motion, I think a second as well?
Not yet.
Okay, I think Councilman Weissman was about to second it, but
Well, who moved it?
Mr. Ross, Councilman Ross.
I say.
So, any discussion? If not, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That carries 4 to
Let there be
0.
light.
I'm sorry?
Let there be light.
Let there be light.
Very good, we have light. I think we have nothing further on the agenda, except,
Would there be that other issue that I mentioned?
yeah, I was going to make that announcement, except just an announcement that we were advised by the Secretary of State yesterday that they were in receipt of and been filed our moratorium law, so effective now for the next 90 days, subject to
Actually,
whatever-
effective last night, building department is no longer taking.
accepting applications, is correct. So it's in effect for 90 days, subject to if there's any renewal of it.
And there's another 3-month extension on that.
If, that's up to us, if we grant an extension in 3 months. Well, actually, Mr. Lynch, is it 90 days or 3 months? It'd be different.
I believe it's 90 days.
Okay.
Potatoes.
Very good. Then
And it'll be 90 days from the time it started, as
Yeah.
opposed to back.
Right, we have,
as a
but
technical-
not back from the
And
fall.
what's the date?
Tomorrow, it's really tomorrow, I guess.
Effective.
I mean, whatever it is. They're not accepting them anymore.
Right.
Will be effective tomorrow.
Very good. Thank you. And then I think at this point, we'll just adjourn in memory of both 2 veterans who passed away this week, Bill Farber and retired Spring Valley Police Chief Kranek. They're members of what's been called the Greatest Generation, and they were in their 90s. Their numbers are dwindling, and very soon there'll be no one left alive to remind us of what the world went through during that period. So we honor their lives and their service, and we mourn their passing.
Make a motion.
I'm sorry?
Motion to
He was the one who here.
Yeah, if you recall, Mr.
Second.
Farber came here, he...
Mr. Supervisor, I'll second.
Thank you, Councilman. And then we'll need to vote.
Making a motion to adjourn and thereon.
Right, that was him. He was-
Look, I haven't-
Yes, he was a gentleman, came up and...
Was he? Yeah. Was he?
And his was the concert for the veterans.
We're going to name the concert in honor of him from now on.
All in favor? Aye. Was he sick? Anyone opposed? We're adjourned.
You're relentless, you never miss anything.
Back and forth in the hospital.